My British Empire. This video is purely for entertainment and does not infringe on copyrights or laws. The rights to the novel and image belong to the original author. We do not claim ownership. Don't like waiting and want to listen to this fanfic in full now? Subscribe to our Patreon, where you'll find the best fanfics. Chapter 151 Negotiation. Okay, the room is much quieter now, which is a good time for us to talk. Edward took a deep breath, looked at the nobles with a relaxed face and said, it seemed that the air in the room was much fresher. Pressing down casually, the guards put down the long sword in their hands knowingly, creating a more relaxed environment. Edward's actions were still effective, and the expressions of many nobles relaxed a lot, and the atmosphere began to calm down. Someone said, why do you have to negotiate with these nobles and capture them? Wouldn't Scotland get it? In fact, this view is wrong. Scotland is equal to nobles, but these nobles are not equal to Scotland. In other words, Scotland is ruled by these nobles, but it is useless for you to capture them. If they are not willing to do things for you, you will not get Scotland. Unlike England, Scotland's social structure is roughly the same as those of continental European countries. They are prevalent in the joint rule of nobles and kings, and even Scotland is even more exaggerated. Because the kings of several generations came to the throne at a young age, the power of the country was usurped by the nobles, and the king's rights were minimal. Moreover, although Edward captured these nobles in Edinburgh, their foundations are on local castles and manors. If you kill them, their sons or brothers will directly inherit the title, and then riots broke out in Scotland, so you must negotiate to get them to do things for you and achieve their goals. After all, they don't want to die either. After waiting for a while, the nobles talked a lot, and then 4 people from a distance negotiated with Edward, and the others were outside the audience as expected. They are all the contemporary leaders of the 4 major families. They are Bishop David Beaton, Archibald Campbell, 5th Earl of Argyll, and Adolf Lang, Earl of Lennox, Knox, plus James Hamilton, Earl of Arran. These 4 people are all earl families who have been in power in Scotland for generations. One of the more special points is that the contemporary patriarch of the Beaton family is a monk, and he is also the largest local bishop of Catholicism in Scotland. Edward couldn't help looking at the bishop, and nodded to him in a friendly way, and Bishop Beaton also smiled kindly. According to Edward's information, the Beaton family's fief is on the border between England and Scotland, and they have always been aristocrats who are friendly to England. And more importantly, the current patriarch, Bishop Beaton, is still a monk who yearns for Protestantism. And now, why has England's international status changed from a former wild island country to an international power? Only a little worse than France, isn't it? Because England is now a Protestant lighthouse country. When Protestantism just started, England took the lead in responding, and Henry VIII set off a religious reform, which made England famous, and its status improved linearly. Although Henry VIII was peddling dog meat, it did not prevent England from being the yearning country of Protestants and the beacon of Protestantism. In view of this, Edward set the first content of the negotiation as the religious reform. Gentlemen, it can be said that I have controlled most of the territory of Scotland at present, so for your freedom and for the future of Scotland, we still need to negotiate. Although Edward's words were a bit harsh, the 4 nobles still nodded in approval. As we all know, the tyrant in Rome, united with a group of greedy people, exploited the Lamb of the Lord in the name of God. In order to oppose this kind of behavior, we England followed God's instructions and resisted the tyrant in Rome and his party members. Since then, England has re-established its belief in God, and all English people have truly become lambs of the Lord. As soon as I came to Scotland, I couldn't bear to let the Scots continue to be exploited, so I proposed that Scotland follow the model of England and re-establish the belief in God, Edward said, with an expression of righteous indignation on his face, as if everything was for the people of Scotland. This is not good. The Scots are already used to the existence of the church, so if they act rashly, they may not be used to it. As soon as Edward finished speaking, everyone else had expressions of thinking, while the elderly Earl Alan weakly objected. Your Excellency, in order not to endure the exploitation of the church, and to allow the Scots to become the lambs of the Lord again, I think the Scots will agree. Edward is not surprised that there are voices of opposition. The centuries-old church is not in vain. However, Edward is not worried about the opposition of the nobles at all, and this proposal will definitely be agreed in the end. First, England's religious reform has profoundly affected Scotland, and the distance is too close, so it is difficult not to influence it. Second, the Church of Rome is indeed a bastard, and the nobles and common people are indeed displeased with it. Third, in 1560 in history, a John Knox directly overthrew Catholicism, established a Presbyterian Church of Scotland, and established it as the state religion. It can be seen that a commoner can overthrow Catholicism 10 years later, but now Edward does not believe that he cannot overthrow Catholicism, Edward thought to himself, and the nobles on the opposite side also chattered, and finally Bishop Eaton announced the result. Your Majesty, we agree with your proposal to reform the church. Bishop Eaton looked around, then said loudly, since you agree, let me explain that I want half of the church's assets. Edward felt satisfied in his heart, and then put forward his own conditions as soon as these words were finished. There was a commotion and discussion among the audience. Your Majesty, you are so greedy. Your Majesty, you ask too much. The nobles expressed their dissatisfaction with Edward Lyon's big mouth, blaming him for being too greedy. Edward immediately argued with the reason, and reached a consensus on the distribution of benefits based on the fact that the nobles own 7 floors, and he gets 3 floors of teaching property. Next, Edward also reached a consensus with the nobles on the right to appoint regional bishops. Out of compensation, the nobles allowed Edward to appoint and dismiss bishops in half of the region. Next, thanks to the nourishment of the fat meat of the church, the subsequent negotiations have been friendly and harmonious. Therefore, the nobles recognized the Treaty of Greenwich, recognized the marriage between Queen Mary and Edward, and agreed to the establishment of the United Kingdom between Scotland and England, and respected Edward as the King of Scotland and Mary as the Queen. It also recognizes the uniqueness of the succession to the throne of the descendants of Edward and Mary. The aristocrats agreed very easily. It was a matter of name, and Queen Mary was also in Edward's hands, so it was difficult to change. The price was that Edward recognized the nobility's territorial ownership in the lowlands, which could not be changed afterwards. After some quarrels and threats between Edward and the nobles, they finally reached an agreement to abolish the Scottish Parliament and merge it into the English Parliament, and the members will have seats in the English Parliament. However, the number of members of Parliament also abolished Edward's rhetoric, and finally reached an agreement with 46 upper houses and 57 lower houses. These seats are exactly a quarter of the number of the new Parliament. The nobles demanded that Edward and Mary not personally manage Scottish affairs, but as a price, the appointment of the Minister of the Privy Council was appointed by Edward and Mary, but the candidates must be Scots. Edward also stipulated that Scotland is not allowed to have a standing army. In order to protect Scotland's security, Edward made a big deal to let 2,000 troops stay in Edinburgh, and the military expenses were not paid by the Scots, so the nobles agreed. Edward also requested that on May 15 every year, Scotland must send a year's tax to London, which is the royal treasury of Edward and Mary. The rest are scattered things, such as the territory of the Scottish royal family, the trade issues between England and Scotland, and the original debts of the Scottish royal family and other nobles, and as the price of everything, it is also to comfort the Scottish nobles, and it can also be said to be a bribe for the Scottish nobles to betray the country. Edward decided to exempt half of the ransom for the nobles, and stipulated that the land can be used to pay the remaining half of the ransom. The nobles were overjoyed. Scotland is vast and sparsely populated, and nothing else but land is plentiful, so Edward finally concluded that he not only won a crown when he came to Scotland, but also partially controlled Scotland, avoiding future worries. Of course, he also got a lot of money. As for why Edward didn't directly control Scotland, but gave up such rights, he had his own plans because he was waiting for the next opportunity. Edward didn't believe it. The religious reform was so smooth that no one rebelled. Ask for a ticket. Chapter 152. Parliament passes the proposal. Generally speaking, the negotiations between Edward and the nobles in the afternoon were not bad. Although he only got the crown of a Scottish king, he could not directly rule Scotland. However, as long as the Scots don't understand the importance of having a name, Delho has to learn from ancient China, using names to kill people. After reaching a specific agreement, Edward will no longer be in charge, and he doesn't want to spend time entangled with those nobles and waste his tongue. The dozen or so Privy Council ministers he brought finally came in handy, and Edward handed over the specific negotiations to them after drinking saliva to moisten his throat. Edward left his maid Luna and the Privy Council ministers to negotiate with the Scottish nobles before walking out slowly. To be honest, among so many conditions, the most meaningful one is to merge the Scottish Parliament, which will greatly reduce the resistance for Edward to control Scotland as neighbouring countries. Scotland and England have a great influence on each other. It can even be said that there are still some entrusted nobles in the previous generations of English dynasties, and the nobles of Scotland and England are still married to each other. England has a Privy Council, Scotland has a Privy Council, England has a Parliament, Scotland has a Parliament, England has counties, Scotland has counties, but in detail, it is still similar. except that England is supplemented by nobles, while Scotland is dominated by nobles, but a bigger difference is Parliament. If the main function of the English Parliament is to legislate and collect taxes, then the Scottish Parliament is like the British Parliament in the modern sense. It not only has the legislative and tax-collecting powers of the English Parliament, but also can decide important decisions in Scotland, and even the succession of the king requires the recognition of the Parliament. For example, Henry VIII signed the Treaty of Greenwich for Edward, even though the nobles of the Privy Council at that time signed it, but the Parliament did not agree, and the agreement was directly invalidated. You asked where the king was, and the king died in battle, so Queen Mary came to the throne at a young age. What diplomacy, military, administration, judiciary, and Parliament can intervene, and the power is astonishingly great. Unlike England, the Scottish Parliament is a unicameral system, with no upper and lower houses, and all members are not elected, but directly inherited by convention. Most of the MPs are nobles from various places and local bishops and monks, but the bishops of the church gradually withdraw from secular rule, and the nobles almost dominate the Scottish Parliament. Therefore, it is not a lie that the aristocracy ruled Scotland, but a fact. If the Scottish Parliament is merged into the English Parliament, although it will increase the difficulty for Edward to control the Parliament, it will also reduce the control of the Scottish nobles over Scotland. With a good mood, Edward came to Queen Mary's room with ease, ignoring the guard salute. Edward knocked on the door and broke in directly. However, everything is normal inside, and there are no scenes that readers like to see, and Edward is slightly disappointed. On the big bed covered with the woolen quilts, the charming Queen Mother Mary was holding Mary's childhood toys and playing with the little Lolita amidst the laughter. It was a happy picture of a mother and daughter at this time. Queen Mary stepped back from the position of Queen Mother of Scotland, who was happy with power, and transformed into an image of an amiable mother, exuding the brilliance of motherhood. Cathy, the maid who accompanied little Lolita all the way to England, also looked at the scene with tears in her eyes, covered her mouth with her hands, and couldn't tell whether she was laughing or crying. And Queen Mary and little Lolita did not forget this loyal maid, and talked to her from time to time. At this time, the Queen Mother finally noticed Edward's entry. Her gentle expression was instantly put away, and she looked at Edward stiffly and indifferently. This made Edward feel a little guilty. Shouldn't he destroy this scene? How wonderful is the reunion of mother and daughter! But in an instant, Edward's heart stiffened again. Little Lolita is his own now, and he can see him whenever he wants, so you don't need to worry about it. Thinking of this, Edward raised his head directly and stared at Queen Mary. Your Majesty, Mary is my fiancée now, and I have the right to take her away. Haha. Your Majesty, what if I say no? Queen Mary walked over, 5 feet away from Edward, raised her chin arrogantly, and said condescendingly, looking at Queen Mary, who was about 1.5 meters away from him. Edward could easily see her deep blue eyes and her curved and slender eyebrows. Edward just wanted to reprimand and show off his majesty as the king, but unexpectedly, little Lolita interjected. At this time, Edward, I'm going to sleep with my mother today, so I won't go back with you. The little Lolita seemed to be nourished by her mother's love, and she started to speak coquettishly, and stabbed him directly. Edward silently mended the wound in his heart, with a doting smile on his face. Okay, Mary, I'll pick you up tomorrow. As he said that, he no longer looked at the arrogant face of the Queen Mother Mary, nor admired the huge castle. Edward stepped forward and walked out swaggeringly on the other side. Queen Mary also looked at Edward's back in surprise. She thought that the little king would use his power to forcibly take Mary with him like a child, so as to show off his kingly demeanor. Edward was a little unhappy that he didn't bring little Lolita out, and then he brought the guards to the castle and looked down at the scene below. Due to the arrival of Edward and the presence of the English navy, the Earl of Wellington immediately opened the city gate, allowing the poor to enter and exit freely for business. Therefore, even though it is evening now, Edinburgh is still full of people coming and going, which is a lively scene. Although Edinburgh is not as prosperous as London at this time, and has such a commercial atmosphere, Edward still looks at it tirelessly. This is his city, which will soon bring him wealth and contribute to his empire. This is also the first country that Edward conquered, and it is also the country that brought him a crown, but Edward believes that this is just the beginning. The next day, Edward used Mary's name to convene the Scottish Parliament. The council was presided over by the venerable Earl of Arran. So, after more than an hour of resolutions and voting, with 196 votes in favour and 59 votes against, the Scottish Parliament officially announced that England and Scotland established a united kingdom, and jointly obeyed Edward and Mary as the monarchs of the two countries, and announced that the heirs of the two will always be the sole heirs to the throne. But they also announced that the Privy Council, as the commission of the king, would handle the internal affairs of Scotland in place of the king, and that Edward and Mary would not be able to interfere in Scottish affairs with the permission of the Privy Council. Moreover, the Parliament also passed a resolution to abolish the Scottish Parliament and merge it into the English Parliament. Since then, Edward has de jure the Scottish throne and has become the de jure ruler of Scotland. Chapter 153 Dissatisfaction. The Scottish Parliament passed all the contents discussed by Edward and the nobles in one fell swoop, and fixed them in the form of laws. After Edward heard the news, he relaxed, and the smile on his face deepened, but Edward was satisfied. But it didn't mean everyone was satisfied. Although most of the Scottish Parliament is dominated by nobles and monks, ordinary people still have some seats. Otherwise, how did the more than 50 votes against it come from? Donald is one of the only 27 civilian members of the Scottish Parliament. As the largest rancher in the Tayside area, he owns more than 20,000 acres of pasture. In the Tayside area there are 15,000 sheep and 3,000 cows in the pasture, with a total value of £100,000. His wealth is richer than most nobles, so the Scottish Parliament gave him a seat for England. Donald hated and disliked the state. England's wool sold well in Europe, and English merchants often competed with him, causing losses of thousands of pounds every year. What is the concept of thousands of pounds? He can buy a title of nobility in Germany, or he can buy hundreds of acres of land, although they are all the same grassland. In the sparsely populated Scotland, Donald's heart keeps bleeding when he thinks of these things, especially these are 1/3 of his annual profit, which makes him even more difficult to let go. But today the Parliament agreed to the establishment of the United Kingdom between Scotland and England. My God, are those nobles crazy? Regardless of the nobles, Donald voted against it anyway. You must know that the English have always occupied a huge market in Spain and the Netherlands, as well as Florence, the textile center of the Mediterranean, at this time, and the Scots cannot compete with the English there. In view of the enmity between England and France, the French prohibited the English from exporting textiles to France, so France became the main market for Scotland's wool exports. Moreover, the French have always been the allies of Scotland. Compared with other merchants in France, Scottish merchants have a special status, and France has become the dairy cow of the Scots. However, the Parliament now agrees to establish the United Kingdom with England, and also abides by the Tudor royal family as the royal family of the United Kingdom. In this way, Scottish wool cannot be exported to France. This is killing Donald. Without the French market, where will his wool be sold? So, full of resentment and worries about the future, Donald returned to his mansion in Edinburgh, sulking alone in a chair against the Scottish Parliament. This is not a good idea. Just those nobles can easily crush themselves, not to mention there is an English king behind them. No matter how he thinks, Donald realizes that it is a dead end. Is his family business about to fail? Thinking of this, Donald's face was full of gray, and his whole body became decadent. No. Even if my Timothy family is destroyed, don't let those nobles and the English feel better. Whispering in his mouth, Donald couldn't help clenching his fists, his face full of resentment. Master, Mr. Russell and Mr. Scott are here to see you. When Donald made up his mind there, a young servant timidly ran in, saluted, and said softly. Hearing the servant's report, Donald couldn't help feeling a little puzzled. Why did they come to him? As he walked, he thought, they are also one of the few ranchers in Scotland, so they have the same purpose as their own. Thinking of this, Donald couldn't help but his heart lit up, and his eyes lit up. After a while, Donald came to the hall and saw 5 or 6 people standing together, the leaders of which were the red-haired Russell and the old-fashioned Scott. "Oh, my friends, it is an honor for you to come to my house." Donald greeted them with a happy smile, gave them a hug, and invited them to sit down. "Donald, we didn't come to you to reminisce about the past. You know the specific reason," the red-haired Russell said slowly with a bitter face. "Yes, Mr. Donald, we came to you to brainstorm together and discuss what can be done." The stuffy Scot didn't speak, but the man next to them did. Donald took a look and found a strong young man standing up and shouting loudly. Donald knew him, Nigel, also a big sheep farmer, whose name means warrior or winner in Scottish, but with his tall and mighty figure, being a warrior is not bad. Donald thought silently in his heart, but his face remained motionless. "Since you are all like this, let's find a way together to find a way for our family to survive." In view of this, Donald stopped talking nonsense and said directly, "The proposal passed by the Parliament today. Everyone knows that France will definitely deal with us like the English. If we don't find a way, I'm afraid we will all go bankrupt." Donald spread his hands and said with a melancholy face, and then he looked at the rigid Scot again. "Among so many people, Scott is the only nobleman. Although he is a lord, he is different from them after all. Besides, his family does not raise sheep, which made Donald feel suspicious, seeming to sense the meaning in Donald's gaze. The staid and silent Scot looked at Donald, and said with care, "My father died in 1542. In this way, Donald understood what was going on. In that year, King James V of Scotland was killed in action, along with the nobles who followed him, including Scott's father, and the old-fashioned Scot does not live up to this title. He is old-fashioned and persistent. He is worried about the death of his father by the English. Moreover, he is also a Cade, the main ethnic group in Scotland, and he has deep resistance to an English king ruling Scotland. Otherwise, we will recruit troops to compete with the English. With a few of us, there will always be thousands of people." The brave Nigel saw the silence of the crowd, and then spoke loudly of his plan, disrupting the calm. "You can't say that, Nigel. We spend money to recruit all kinds of soldiers. How can we beat the English?" Donald looked at Nigel, who was spitting speechlessly, and eyed him directly. It seemed that what Donald said made sense. Nigel was stuck for a while, and didn't know what to say at this time. Russell's eyes lit up when he was thinking, and he said immediately, "But we can recruit some brave people. Anyway, we are not short of money." "You mean the Highlanders?" Donald blurted out a sentence with his eyes lit up. "Ask for a ticket. Ask for a monthly ticket. Ask for a large number of monthly tickets." Chapter 154 Banquet. Highlanders? The old-fashioned Scot, the brave Nigel, and several other people called out in surprise, and the surprised expressions on their faces were wonderful. "What they call Highlanders is not what we call Highlanders. The Scottish Highlands traditionally refer to the area northwest of the Dumbarton-Stonehaven line, including the Hebrides, parts of Perthshire and Buteshire, where the true Highlanders live. The coastal lowlands, including Orkney Islands, Shetland Islands, Nairn County, Mary County, Banff County, and most of East Aberdeenshire, belong to the Highlands in the eyes of the English, but in Scotland, in the eyes of people, it is not a real highland. Although these areas are also different from the lowlands in terms of altitude and terrain, they are also different from the real highlands. They are in the same position. They are basically obedient Highlanders who are not as wild and bloody as real Highlanders. There are big differences between the Scottish Highlands and the Scottish Lowlands, such as population structure. The Lowlands are basically English and Celtic, while the Highlands are basically Celtic Aborigines, and the language is also different. The language in the Lowlands is basically not much different from English, while Gaelic is prevalent in the Highlands. More importantly, the degree of social evolution is different. The lowland area is currently a feudal society, while the Highland area is a tribal alliance-style clan society. The Scottish Highlanders have always been indifferent to Edinburgh's orders, and sometimes even rebelled when they got hot-headed, which caused the nobles of Edinburgh a headache. For example, the last time the nobles summoned the Highlanders to join the battle, all the tribes who were close to the lowland areas came, but the real barbarian warriors of the tribe were nowhere to be seen. Therefore, none of the people who fought the English last time were real Highland warriors, and their wildness has degraded a lot. "Mr. Russell, are you joking?" One of the fatter congressmen frowned and said seriously, "Even if these Highlanders are invited, we may not be able to control them. For us lowlanders, I'm afraid it will be another disaster." Scots in the lowlands have always had mixed feelings about the Highlanders. On the one hand, when the English invaded, they basically relied on them to drive away the English. On the other hand, once the Highlanders were short of food, the lowland areas were their first target. They would not buy with money, but with their own hand to grab. Just like this, they have been falling in love and killing each other. Hundreds of people have always been like this. Yes, after the English leave, I'm afraid the lowlands will suffer heavy losses. Donald thought the same in his heart, and sighed with an unbearable expression on his face. I can't control that much anymore. As long as the English can be driven out, no matter how high the price is." The old-fashioned Scot had a sneer on his face at this time, and the smile on the corner of his mouth looked a bit cruel. "Besides, no matter how they make trouble, they can't get on us. Some common people are just dead. It's no big deal. Yes, as long as we have nothing to do, it's for Scotland anyway, so it's worth sacrificing a little bit." On the side, Nigel said with a straight and majestic body, "It's possible that those barbarians and the English will lose both. This is a real joy." As he said that, Nigel seemed to think of a happy ending, grinning happily and giggling. "That's really God's blessing. We can live a peaceful life for a few days." But the expected echo did not come to mind. Instead, everyone was silent. Donald and the others are certainly not as naive as Nigel, and there is nothing so perfect in the world after all. Such a chance is too slim. The biggest possibility is that the English will defeat the Highlanders. According to their thinking, they still have to invite the French to defeat the exhausted English and return Scotland to the Scots. Of course, these people acquiesced from the bottom of their hearts, but they didn't say it out loud. Next, Everyone began to discuss specific actions, and the liaison work was handed over to Russell. He often sold food to the Highlanders and had a wide network of contacts. Then everyone discussed again, contacting close businessmen or nobles who were dissatisfied with the council's decision, and pooling money together for action. This discussion continued until the evening. Looking at the darkening sky, Donald remembered an important matter. "Oh, everyone, let's leave. The little King of England is holding a banquet tonight, and the nobles and MPs in Edinburgh have basically received invitations. Let's pack up quickly, don't be late." While speaking, Donald hurriedly called the servants and began to prepare clothes and carriages. "Oh, really? Let's go back quickly, or we will be late, and the king, who doesn't look like a good stubble, is not easy to mess with." Russell and the others also thought of this for a moment, hurriedly walked out, and got into their own carriage, and Nigel, who was disapproving at first, seemed to think of the poor figure of the nobleman who was buried alive yesterday when he heard Russell's words, and trembled all over his body. It is not worthwhile to offend the king for such a trivial matter. Thinking, Nigel ran out in a hurry, stepped into the carriage with a brisk stride, and hurriedly ordered the groom to go home tonight. Linlith Castle was extremely lively. The beautifully dressed maids ran back and forth, carefully delivering trays of food to the long table on the grass and under the moonlight that was slightly covered by clouds. The guards stood upright one by one, holding their spears, or resting their right hands on the long sword at their waists, staring straight ahead. This time, Edward held an outdoor banquet. After all, there were hundreds of people, and the castle hall couldn't accommodate them. First of all, a huge tent needs to be set up. The tent is not closed, but transparent on all sides, which only serves as a shelter from the wind and sun. Thick dining tables and chairs were placed under the tents, with tablecloths on the tables and small napkins on them, and numbered table knives and spoons on top of the napkins. It was not until the 16th century that table forks began to be commonly used. The maids put plates of food on the long table, while Kongwu's powerful servants brought barrels of wine from the cellar of the castle. It is conservatively estimated that the cellar has been emptied. It seems that the Scottish royal family is really poor. Just a few barrels. Edward looked at the neatly arranged wines in front of him and couldn't help shaking his head. "Lucy, take half of the fire wine on the Navy ship. Anyway, they won't travel far, so they won't need much," Edward ordered Lucy, the little maid beside him on the other side. Major James, who arrived early, always felt a little uneasy since fresh water cannot be kept for a long time during sea voyages, and rum has not been invented until Edward distills it with grain and can preserve it for a long time. The entire market is in short supply for strong wine. The English Navy is even more exaggerated that each ship keeps more than 5 barrels of strong wine, ranking first in the world. The weather is hot. Please vote. Chapter 155. 5 Marys. "Sir, we're here." A well-carved, gorgeous and luxurious carriage passed the moat, and stopped slowly. It just stopped in front of the grass where the banquet was held. Behind a group of noble carriages, the groom who was driving gently reminded himself owner N. Donald agreed softly, and then, with the support of the groom, he got out of the carriage. Looking up, the soldiers lit hundreds of torches, stuck them in the trees, or simply held them in their hands, standing around the grass banquet, all with bright eyes and wide-eyed eyes, not letting any suspicious person go. Immediately, Donald looked at the center, where a huge tent was stationed in the grass. The surrounding walls of the tent were raised, and one could directly see the dining table inside. The graceful maids were carrying food in and out, which seemed to occupy a very large area. Enough for these nobles and councillors to dine together. Take a closer look. Isn't this the exact same tent that James VI threw for a banquet to celebrate having an heir when Queen Mary was born? Donald couldn't help complaining in his heart, but with a happy look on his face, he walked towards the tent. In the Middle Ages, almost most knights liked to eat meat, drink alcohol, and had a big appetite. In many chivalric literature, there are plots of knights eating and drinking, including the story of several knights eating and drinking, and eating a whole wild boar in one go. So, at a glance, Donald saw that next to those tents, the tables of some officers of the army were already full of large pieces of roasted beef, fat mutton that was shiny with oil, and fish with more meat and less spines. Of course they can't enter the tent, only people of high status can enter, such as themselves. Thinking beautifully in his heart, Donald walked in under the huge tent. There were dozens of long tables, and the middle one belonged to the king, high-ranking Scottish nobles and monks, and a businessman like him could only find a place to sit on the edge of the tent near the door. Sit in the early aristocratic banquets, there were no strict regulations on the order of seats. Usually, nobles who were close to the king would get a position close to the king to show their favor, but now, The court personnel who are responsible for the banquets of the royal family have all accepted the unified guidelines. The most important guests sit at the higher table, and the most honorable table with the king is reserved for priests and senior nobles. Then the seats are arranged in order according to the status, and at the same time, the positions of male guests and female guests cross each other and sit after waiting for a while. The nobles and members of parliament also came in turn, leaving only Edward, Queen Mary and Queen Mary. Sure enough, a court etiquette officer immediately walked into the tent and shouted loudly to the nobles, "By the grace of God, His Majesty Edward VI, King of England, France, and Ireland, and Scotland, Defender of the Faith, Head of the Church of England and Ireland, and of Scotland, and Head of the Church of England and Scotland, Her Majesty Mary I, Queen of England and Scots, come to," the court etiquette officer shouted. And the nobles and members of parliament stood up and bowed to salute. "Good day, Your Majesty the King." "Good day, Your Majesty the Queen." Immediately, Edward took little Lolita's hand and walked over step by step, walking from the door to the center. As for why Queen Mary did not come, she gave Edward the reason that she was not feeling well. The two were smiling, and walked over in gorgeous dresses. After the two came to the long table in the center, everyone got up and sat down. The first thing is to pray before the meal, to thank the Lord for His kindness. After the prayer, the servants line up and deliver the food one by one. First came the butler, with bread and butter, and then the cupbearer and his assistants, with wine and spirit. Servants in the castle brought the wine in casks and poured it into large mugs. The bartenders would add spices and sugar to some of the wine and serve it with the final course during the banquet. The food is mainly meat and fish, with less vegetables and fruits. In the back kitchen, the chef and his helpers in the kitchen are exhausted in preparing the meat for the banquet. Since meat is mostly grilled, it is necessary to constantly turn all kinds of meat on the spit: pork, beef, lamb, poultry, game, and they also prepare stews and soups in a large iron pot, which is suspended from the on hooks and chains. Under the pot is a fire, and the chain can be pulled up or down to adjust the temperature. As a result, the cooked, steaming barbecue was sent to the plates of the nobles by the maids one by one. Then the maids placed small dishes mixed with pepper, nutmeg, ginger, bacon, saffron, cloves, cinnamon, and vanilla, these expensive spices from the East, and placed them before the nobles, and Edward also had them. Then Edward saw the eyes of the nobles and councillors light up when they saw the precious seasoning in front of them, and they praised Edward's generosity in their mouths. Of course, these are the collections of the Scottish royal family and the ransom paid by some nobles. It can be seen that they are sincere and not fake at all. Afterwards, some nobles grabbed a handful of pepper and sprinkled it directly on the leg of lamb. Suddenly, the leg of lamb turned red and looked very beautiful. Can't do it. Donald also had a happy face. As a wealthy businessman, such a bold and unrestrained behavior for a year can only be done when he treats guests, and he is usually reluctant to part with it. After the meat, came the fruit. Some of the fruits are roasted, like apples. In the Middle Ages, the doctors of the lifeline of European medicine believed that all fruits were cold food, and if they were to be eaten, they should be cooked in a hot way or added with hot spices. In the eyes of the nobles, stewed fruit is considered high quality, and anyone who eats raw fruit is pure dick. For example, when the pepper-flavored orange, pear, apricot and plum stewed apple soup was in front of Edward, he didn't show any disgust. On the contrary, he happily took a spoonful of it and sent it to the little girl's mouth. So the nobles were very moved. You see, His Majesty the King directly fed such a delicious and cherished delicacy to Queen Mary. What a loving couple this is. So, in this pleasant and peppery tent, the nobles enjoyed an unforgettable dinner. After eating, the nobles gathered together in twos and threes to chat, and even beautiful ladies and handsome nobles gradually walked into the deep forest. And after Edward finished eating, he was also very happy to condolences to the officers of the army. Then, after receiving some nobles, when he was about to take Mary back, he found 4 cute little lallas gathered around her, all about the same age. Your Majesty. It was only after 4 crisp voices of Your Majesty that Mary noticed Edward's arrival. Brother Edward, these are my 4 good friends. Seeing Edward coming, little Mary quickly hugged Edward's arm and introduced him one by one. This is Mary Beaton. Little Laurie pointed to one of the tallest little girls. This is Mary Hamilton. A girl with fair hair. This is Mary Lennox. A little plump girl. This is Mary Campbell. A little girl with the same red hair as little Lolita. 5 Marys. Edward looked at the 5 people and said in surprise, these 4 Marys are all girls from the 4 major Scottish families, which are recorded in history and have the same name. They accompanied Queen Mary to France to study and play together. If you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, It means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelists. There you'll find the original version of this story, and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We're waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels. Chapter 156 Henry II. Yes, Edward. Little Lolita looked at him arrogantly, pointed to 4 little Lolitas of similar stature and said, "They played with me since childhood, and they are all my good friends." "Yes, Your Majesty, we are all good friends." Mary, who was the best of the 4 and seemed to be the oldest, said to Edward without timidity and. The other 3 Lollas also nodded in agreement, their round cheeks flushed red. "Very cute. Okay, then let's play together. I'll come back later." Edward smiled gently at the 5 little Lolitas, said with a smile on his face, and then left, leaving them chattering non-stop. The 5 people watched Edward's figure gradually walk away, and then they stopped being restrained. "Mary, is he your future husband?" The little girl from the Beaton family was the oldest and her mind was more flexible. She moved slowly, walked to Mary's side, and asked softly. After asking this sentence, the little girl blushed like an apple, and the other 3 little Lolitas also had big blue eyes fluttering, their little eyelashes moving, and they looked at Mary curiously, looking very interested. This question is so embarrassing." Mary covered her face with her hands and whispered softly, and then she saw the 4 girls gathered around, and she whispered with a hint of joy and satisfaction, "Yes, Edward is my husband now, and we will live together in the future." Apart from being shy at the beginning, Mary soon became proud and talked about interesting things with her 4 friends. "Edward tells me stories every night. There are so many stories. There are not only dwarfs, princesses, knights, and witches in them. Is it the kind of ugly witch who can do magic? One of them has long light yellow hair and is wearing a long white dress with a pink bow hanging on the skirt, looking extremely cute with a look of curiosity on her pink face." She asked softly. "Yes, those witches with pointed hats, battered broomsticks, and black robes, they are amazing." Speaking of this, Queen Lori seemed to get excited all of a sudden. She waved her arms to describe the appearance of a witch, and then used exaggerated adjectives to express the description of the witch as she spoke sentence by sentence. The girls also rang out bursts of exclamation, which satisfies Mary's vanity very well, and Mary will puff out her small chest at this time, with a frightened face, showing off that this is her husband, and none of you have it. Edward would not know how Mary showed off later, and his image grew among the 4 Marys. Edward walked aimlessly, and on the way, nobles or members of parliament also greeted each other, and Edward nodded as he walked. He suddenly discovered that the leaders of the 4 major Scottish families were discussing something together at this time. And they seemed to be having a good chat, and around them, surrounded by a circle of flattering nobles, with their heads outstretched, hoping to squeeze in. "Your Majesty." "Your Majesty." Seeing Edward's arrival, the nobles bowed down one by one. "Oh. What are you talking about, gentlemen? So much fun." Edward looked at Earl Allen, Earl Argyle and others, and said jokingly, "It's nothing, it's just some vulgar Scottish folk jokes," for fear of staining the ears of His Majesty the King. The grey-haired former regent, Earl Allen, said softly while leaning on a cane. "Oh. Really? Forget it." In view of this, Edward did not delve into it, and said gently with a smile, "Just now I saw girls from several families playing with Mary, and they all have the same name." "It's really a fate," Edward said with a look of exclamation on his face. Everyone didn't know what he was going to say, so they could only echo it. "Look, since they have such a good relationship, let them live together in the castle for a few days. Your Majesty the Queen is also lonely, so I can just accompany her." This. Earl Allen and the others looked at each other, overjoyed in their hearts. They wished for a chance to have a good relationship with the Queen. "Your Majesty." "Yes, then those girls will be entrusted to you from now on." Earl Allen smiled and bowed to thank him. "Okay, let's talk slowly. I'll go first." After Edward received the reply, he left on his own, and walked into the distance under the watchful eyes of the nobles. This night, the Scottish nobles were very satisfied. Scotland is a poor place, and some aristocratic spices don't see each other several times a year. "I had a good meal today, and I felt a lot happier overnight." Edward's reputation for generosity spread throughout Edinburgh, saving him a lot of popularity. The evil dividing line. In the past few days, Edward almost always personally received Scottish nobles and MPs, as well as some respected monks and influential businessmen. In the past few days, the news of England's capture of Edinburgh has also spread to France, along with the merchants. France, Paris, Louvre Museum. Today's weather is a bit hot, which made King Henry II of France very unhappy, with an irritable mood. Henry II strolled in the resplendent Louvre. Unlike his father Francois I, Henry II had no sense of art. But in order to increase the king's reputation, he collected Italian artworks every year without interruption to maintain this royal tradition. Looking at the dazzling array of sculptures and oil paintings in front of him, he became more and more irritable. These reminded him of his father, Francois I, a treacherous and shameless man. When he could take him and his elder brother back with the French crown prince, he cruelly abandoned them in Charles, Spain. In the hands of the Fifth World, let them suffer cruel torture. 10 days after returning to France, his brother died, which shows how much his body was persecuted, and this also created his cruel and easy-to-kill character. 2 years ago, the year he ascended the throne with Edward, he himself set up the court of fire to persecute Protestants. And in order to retaliate against Spain, he encouraged the frontier troops to kill the border residents in the Spanish area at will and provoke Spain. At this moment, he felt a fire in his heart, which made him uncomfortable. "Your Majesty, please see the Duke of Guise," a young maid said delicately. "Bring him to see me." Henry II waved his hand and ordered directly. Claude de Lorraine was the first Duke of Guise. Since he was the second son of René II, Duke of Lorraine, his family was also the Guise family. In order to separate them, the 53-year-old Duke of Guise is strong in action and flexible in his steps, and there is no sign that he will go to see God next year. "Your Majesty, the English have captured Edinburgh." Chapter 157. The MacDonald Tribe. Although the Duke of Guise is 53 years old, as a soldier, he has fought under Francois I for decades, and abruptly changed from a second son of a duke without a territory to a favorite of the king, becoming the only one who is not a nobleman who was awarded a duke as a member of the royal family. A good body gave him great capital. Therefore, among the nobles, he was able to complete the tasks assigned by the king, thus becoming the most popular nobleman in France. He was wearing a black aristocratic dress with lace, especially the lave collar around his neck, which was exactly the same as that of Henry II. What is a ruff collar? It is a collar shaped like a wheel. The collar is tied high, thick and hard, and the entire neck is wrapped by a long tube. After wearing it around the neck, the head cannot move freely, it is inconvenient to eat and drink, and the neck cannot be crooked or twisted, which brings great troubles to people. But it has an advantage that it can force people to show a proud, majestic, and invincible posture. And this kind of clothing was spread from France to the world, and it was very popular among nobles, which is one of the origins of the title of Gallic chicken. Therefore, facing Henry II, Guise still felt a sense of arrogance, but Henry II was used to it. "Your Majesty," according to reports from spies, on May 5, Major Diogenes Calsrin captured the gates of Edinburgh, and then united with the English to capture Edinburgh, including Queen Mary and Queen Mary, all the nobles were captured. Subsequently, on May 15, King Edward VI of England led the navy and 7,000, including 2,000 civilians, troops to station in Edinburgh. With his head lowered, the Duke of Guise's deep voice sounded slowly, with a dignified expression on his face. "What? It's been more than 10 days, why did you only get the news now? Why did you go?" After listening to the Duke of Guise's narration, Henry II questioned directly. His whole body was like an erupting volcano, full of burning magma, easily destroying anyone. The maids serving on the side were trembling with fright, their faces turned pale, but the Duke of Guise was not frightened, and he was calm, as if nothing had happened. "My lord, this time it is mainly due to the blockade of the port in Edinburgh by the Earl of Wellington in England, which caused a delay in the news." The Duke of Guise spoke calmly, his eyes calm. "Your Majesty, at present we should think about how to act. Are the 5,000 soldiers still operating as usual?" It turned out that Henry II was worried about the situation in Scotland at the beginning. As early as when Earl Edward invaded Scotland, the French were preparing to increase their troops. At that time, not long after Henry II came to the throne, the local nobles were a little ready to move. When Henry II calmed down the domestic nobles, the French Protestants became restless in view of the fact that Scotland is not in danger for a while and remains in a stable state. Henry II first took care of the Protestants before preparing to gather troops to help Scotland. Who knows? After the troops were assembled with great difficulty, and Henry II also borrowed a lot of money to make up enough funds, Scotland would be finished, and Henry II would vomit blood out of breath pie, recruit another 3,000 people this time, and make up 8,000 people. The English people who must be killed will be bloody. It is best to capture that teenage Edward VI alive. Henry II gritted his teeth and said viciously, the sharp eyes looked terrifying. "But, Your Majesty, our navy may not be able to deal with the English." The Duke of Guise was not embarrassed either, "and had Henry II recruit me in the Netherlands, or in Denmark, no matter how much you pay, I will annihilate the entire English navy this time." Henry II gritted his teeth and said that he felt that his face had been cut a bit when Edward snatched his daughter-in-law. "Yes, your majesty, as you wish." When the war was mentioned, the Duke of Guise was a little bit excited, especially facing the old enemy of England. It was even more exciting. "Unfortunately, I am not suitable for naval warfare. When the English navy is destroyed, I will lead the army to capture Edward VI alive." Thinking silently in his heart, the Duke of Guise returned to his mansion and began to complete the tasks assigned by Henry II. The evil dividing line, clan, a social group claiming a common ancestry. The word is Gaelic and means offspring or child. The Scottish Highland clan is almost synonymous with clan. They prospered until 1745, when the Scottish clans failed to revolt in support of the Stuarts' return to the throne, and the powers of the clan heads were only abolished thereafter. Every Scottish clan takes an ancestor's name to the family name, often prefixed with Mac, abbreviated Mac or M, meaning son. Common clan names are Macpherson, MacDougall, MacGregor and Gordon, and each clan wears its own plaid cloak, or tartan, and these clans often raided the lowlands of southeastern Scotland by surprise, thus gaining a reputation for lawlessness. Leading the horse and following the caravan, Lewis lightly stepped on the ground covered with moss and gravel, and had to cross the flowing water from time to time, which was very hard work. This is a canyon area, and horses cannot carry him. He needs to get down by himself as the envoy sent by Donald and Russell. Lewis is the leader of the entire caravan. Except for the guide, everyone in the caravan is subordinate to Donald and others. The goods in the caravan are also brought by them. Gifts from various tribes. Among them are not only the salt and cloth needed by the Highlanders, but also the more precious bronze weapons. There is also the more precious wine, which is a gift to the clan leader. This is his last stop. The MacDonald clan, located in the most northwestern part of Scotland, is also one of the best clans in the entire Highlands throughout the 14th and 15th centuries. The MacDonald clan was the most powerful tribe in Scotland, ruling the entire valley region of western Scotland and the surrounding islets, known as the Kings of the Outer Islands. Even now, the MacDonald clan still dominates the Highlands together with the Grant, Campbell, Fisher, Cameron and other clans. After striding hard steps, the group of people finally walked out of the canyon and came to the flat plateau, where some figures could be vaguely seen in front of them. "Boss, we're here. The MacDonald tribe is ahead. I've been walking for decades. There's nothing wrong with it." An old guide who was about to lose his teeth pointed forward and said excitedly, his cloudy eyes shining brightly, "It's finally here. I'm exhausted." Lewis said loudly to his subordinates, leaning on a tree branch as a crutch, "The weather is hot. Please vote!" Chapter 158. Big Business. The sparse green grass ahead can cover Lewis' knees, and under the green grass are pieces of gravel. From a distance, such a vast grassland is boundless, and when the sun came here, he was also a little groggy. The sun shone on his body, but Lewis couldn't feel the warmth. Instead, even his skin conveyed to him a cold foreboding. Looking up at the dim sun in front of him, Lewis thought for a while, turned around, and suggested, "Everyone should wear furs. This place is different from the lowlands, but there should be no accidents at this time." After finishing speaking, he opened his horse's camel backpack, pulled out a woolen coat, put it on the outermost layer, and made his whole body look bigger since their boss had already worn them. Their subordinates also took out their coats from their backpacks one by one and wrapped them outside. Simply, here in Scotland, there is a shortage of everything. That is, there is no shortage of sheep, and basically everyone has a wool coat. Looking at the bloated caravan members, Lewis led the team forward slowly. It was true that Wang Shin ran a dead horse. From a distance, they saw that the distance was only a few miles. After they walked for an hour, the route still remained the same. Fortunately, they rode horses and walked for about 4 hours. The sun's rays became weaker and weaker, and they couldn't feel the warmth at all, and the temperature dropped sharply. Lewis found that they could all see the hot air they exhaled when they came to the MacDonald tribe, which was full of bonfires. It was completely dark, and the whole plateau was completely dark, and they could even hear a few howling wolves. In the Highlands, where the land is sparsely populated, the animals are the masters of the Highlands. The population of the MacDonald tribe is only over 1,000, while the largest wolf pack on the Highlands is almost 1,000. When the two work together, humans, it's totally hopeless, and these dozens of them are definitely the best food for the wolves at night in the Highlands. "Logan, go and say hello, be careful." Lewis and the others were a mile away from the MacDonald tribe, carefully observing the patrolling riders, turned their heads, and said to the cowering guide on the side the reason why Lewis looked for the skinny old man was not only because he knew the addresses of various tribes in the Highland area, but also because he had been traveling with caravans in the Highlands for decades, so he was very familiar with the leaders and people of each tribe. It will prevent them from being persecuted innocently. Okay, let's see mine. The old man named Logan agreed confidently. I basically know all the warriors here, so nothing will happen. With that said, Logan picked up a torch, rode on a horse, gave Lewis a reassuring look, and walked slowly over. Seeing Logan walking past slowly on horseback made Lewis and the others anxious. Feeling speechless at this speed and outside the fence of the MacDonald tribe, the cavalry guarding the patrol saw a man riding a horse walking over slowly holding a torch in the distance, and doubts arose in his heart for a moment. Go and call the leader. Just say that there are suspicious people coming. During the patrol, a man with engraved patterns on his body, wearing a Scottish tartan skirt unique to the MacDonald tribe, and a circle stronger than the others around him, held a torch and said to the patrol soldiers on the side end. The patrolman nodded without retorting, and then rode to find the leader afterwards. The tall Scottish warrior frowned and stared at Logan, who was approaching gradually. Hi. Is that Adair in front? I'm Logan. Merchant Logan. Slowly approaching the fence of the MacDonald tribe, Logan quickly dismounted, raised his hands, and saw the Highlanders raising their bows and arrows and preparing to shoot. With horror, and he happened to see the majestic figure in front of him, felt a little familiar, and then shouted loudly, "Wait a minute." Adair felt that the voice was a little familiar, and with the man calling his name, he hesitated to make people stop shooting. After listening carefully for a while, and the distance getting closer, Adair recognized Logan in front of him based on the somewhat blurred face and voice. Oh. So it's Logan. Didn't you say you're going home to retire? Why are you back this time? Knowing that this was someone he knew, Adair asked Logan loudly. Apparently he still had some doubts. Adair, you know, I can't afford to get up early. This time there is a big deal, so I can only get out of bed. Logan slowly led the horse to Adair, but said with a smile in his mouth. In less than a minute, Logan had arrived in front of Adair, bent slightly, with a hippie smile on his face. You really want money and life? Adair admired the old man in front of him, patted his shoulder, and sighed softly. I remember that when he was a child, Logan appeared in his memory, and every year he would bring a large amount of scarce goods to exchange items with their tribe, and this time was the happiest time for these children. Logan was patted on the shoulder by Adair, and he felt as if a big stone was thrown at him, and there was an extra pain. Adair, your strength is getting stronger and stronger. It seems that you are almost #1 warrior in the tribe. Logan said with trembling voice, his eyelids trembling. Who is the #1 warrior? As soon as he finished speaking, there was a loud roar from a distance, like thunder, rang in Logan's ear. I saw a middle-aged man with thick hair, rough skin, and a burly figure who was as tall as Adair walking towards him. The most striking of these are the 3 scars on his face, one of which almost scratched his eye. Logan's eyes lit up, and he quickly bent down to greet him. Chief Ronald, long time no see. Oh. So it's Logan. Why are you here at night? Ronald glanced at Logan, then patted him on the shoulder and asked curiously, Father? Adair on the side also shouted loudly at this time. Ronald glanced at his son, and then turned his gaze to Logan. Haha. Chief Ronald, I am here to bring you a big business. Logan smiled when he heard the words, and said loudly, some of my companions are still outside. When they come, I will talk to you carefully. Okay. I'm here to see what the big business you're talking about is like. Immediately, Logan stood at the fence, waving the torch in his hand towards the distance, and then Ronald and the others waited for a while, and saw a caravan of more than 50 people coming. The eyes of Ronald and other Highlanders were about to pop out. This was almost half a year's worth of supplies exchanged by their tribe big boss. I'm here this time to bring a big deal to your tribe. Ask for a ticket. Chapter 159. Lion, France. When Lewis saw this warrior who was much more beautifully dressed than a Highlander, his first feeling was that he was either the leader of the MacDonald tribe or an upper-level figure of the MacDonald tribe. As soon as the people arrived, Lewis took the lead in bowing and said the exact same lines as Logan. Ha ha ha. As soon as Lewis' words sounded, Ronald and Adair laughed loudly, and Logan beside him was also a little bit dumbfounded, which made Lewis a little confused and didn't know what was going on. Simply let them laugh there. Lewis looked at the guide Logan, and Logan didn't know how to answer, so he could only shake his head with a wry smile. My friend, you are an interesting person. The leader Ronald patted Lewis on the shoulder happily. You are our guest now. Come on, let's go in and talk. Compared with the leader Ronald, Lewis is like a little chick. Under his involvement, Lewis was easily pulled away. Lewis didn't expect this scene, He broke free but couldn't break free, and waved to the caravan in desperation, signaling the caravan to follow. Louis and others entered the MacDonald tribe in this way, which was very easy along the way, looking at the messy tents, roads full of excrement and urine, and bonfires randomly arranged. Louis determined that the MacDonald tribe was no different from other Highlanders. If I had to say something different, they were all strong on average, and they had a lot of people and slaves. Along the way, Louis counted them casually in his mind, no less than 300 or 400 people, and half of them are strong and strong men, which has to be surprising recalling the old guide Logan's words in his mind. Although the MacDonald tribe has come down from the Highland dominance, they still have the largest number of people in the Highlands, especially the fighters, which are estimated to be about 500. In this way, based on the minimum family of 3, the MacDonald tribe has a population of about 1,500. If slaves are added, the population of 2,000 to 3,000 is no problem. Leader, this time we brought you 20 copper axes and 20 copper swords. After seeing the tent covered with the wolf fur and guard standing guard in front of him, Louis was sure that he was the leader of the tribe, so, as soon as he stood firm, Louis showed his sweetness also. There are 200 pounds of salt, 5 pots of honey, 10 iron pots. Finally, we brought you 2 jugs of good wine from England. Louis uttered word by word the goods that made the Highlanders salivate, which made Ronald and Adair's eyes glisten with greed. Tell me, Lowlander, what is your request? There is no free lunch in the world. After listening to it, after a while, the leader Ronald put away his greed and calmed down. It's ridiculous to say that the more backward the place, the stronger and more stubborn the beliefs regarding Catholicism. The Highlanders firmly believed in him, even though the Edinburgh area later determined that the Presbyterian Church was the state religion. The Highlanders began to riot against the Presbyterian Church after the Glorious Revolution. The Highlanders were also the first to support the son of James II, the Stuart family, and the uprising continued. My lord, these are gifts from our master to the MacDonald tribe. Tell me your conditions. Lowlander. Ronald said calmly, our master doesn't have any request, just let your tribe go to plunder Glasgow City. Louis seemed to say another small place name. His face didn't care. You setting up a trap to deceive us? Then you underestimate us too much. We will not be fooled. Ronald seemed to have been molested. His face flushed red, he looked annoyed, and his eyes radiated murderous intent. No wonder he was like this. At that time, the largest city in Scotland was not Edinburgh, but Glasgow. This city, which was regarded as the frontier of defence by the Romans, was located in central Scotland, not far from the Highlands. But the Highlanders didn't dare to plunder, even though it was Scotland's largest port and largest city, not to mention its strong walls and huge army. Glasgow is only 75 kilometers away from Edinburgh, which is 47 miles. It only takes a little more than a day, and the army of the King of Scotland will arrive. It is simply dying. Therefore, as soon as Louis said it, Ronald became angry. My lord, you misunderstood me. I didn't want you to attack Glasgow. I just asked you to plunder the rural areas. There is no city wall there. You don't have to worry about the army. I also invited Grant, Campbell, Fisher and other tribes to act together. The King of Scotland's army can't deal with you. Louis talked as if everything was under control, and the MacDonald tribe just enjoyed it. My friend, I have long known that you are our true friend. If anyone provokes you in the Highlands in the future, you can say that you are my friend of Ronald MacDonald. After hearing what Louis said, Ronald seemed to change his face and immediately said in a friendly manner. The smile on his face was so kind. In this way, the scene of the joyous scene of the guests and the host appeared in the tent, driving away the cold of the Highland night. After arranging for Louis and others to rest, Ronald returned to the tent with an unstoppable sneer on his face. France, Lyon, the star city of France in the Middle Ages, because of the development of the textile and leather industries, it has become one of the richest cities in France, and the well-known wealth has also attracted a large number of idle people. Of course, like all European cities, Lyon, which developed commercially, soon became an autonomous city, and the king and nobles could not control it. However, if His Majesty Henry II recruited troops here, the merchants would still welcome them. At least some of the population could be taken away, reducing the burden on the city. Therefore, when Henry II's recruiter came, the merchants immediately opened the door to convenience, not only providing the venue for free, but also exempting the city gate tax. There is also a reason why businessmen behave this way. As we all know, medieval cities are full of shit and garbage, and France is one of the best. In the capital Paris, people can't bear to have so much shit in the city. Therefore, They piled up their excrement outside the city walls of Paris to alleviate this dirty situation, but after a while, the excrement wall outside Paris was already as high as the city wall, and the Parisians could only raise the city wall to avoid being submerged. Therefore, Paris in the Middle Ages was like Kaifeng in the Song dynasty, in danger of being submerged at any time, and the rulers used the same means to raise the city wall as a defense. Off topic. At this time, the news of His Majesty's recruitment spread throughout Lyon, and mercenaries, large and small, started a frenzy of registration one by one in the last few days. I hope everyone will vote for monthly tickets and strive for more than 100. Chapter 160. The menacing French Navy. The scene of crowds in Lyon, France, was only part of it. In Paris and Marseilles, people came and went, and mercenaries, large and small, began to gather to respond to the king's call. You must know that Swiss mercenaries have always been the first choice of the French king, and now there is a rare opportunity to make money, so of course everyone must seize it. According to historical records, in the 6th century BC, ancient Greek sailors sailed westward along the Mediterranean Sea on sailing ships and moored their ships in a small bay called Massilia. This was the prototype of Marseilles. In 1999, the throughput of the port was second only to the ports of London and Liverpool, making it the third largest port in the world at that time. Marseilles is located on the northern coast of the Mediterranean Sea, 836 kilometers away from Paris in the northwest and 350 kilometers away from Lyon. The terrain around it is hilly and surrounded on three sides by limestone hills. The southeast is close to the Mediterranean Sea, the water is deep and the harbor is wide, there are no rapids and dangerous shoals, and the 10,000-ton giant ship can pass unimpeded. In the west, there is the Rhône River and the flat valley to connect with northern Europe. Therefore, relying on the superior conditions of the port of Marseilles, this is also the headquarters of the French Navy. The center of the port of Marseilles is Massilia, and the port of Marseilles is also known as the port of Massilia. Massilia is 800 meters long from east to west and 250 meters wide from north to south. The harbor is rectangular in shape. A number of bustling streets stretch from here to the east, south, and north. There are majestic and fortified castles built here, facing each other from the north to the south, like two mighty warriors guarding the two banks. The streets around the castle are bustling with priests, clowns, merchants, beggars, and drunk sailors, which together make up the prosperous scene of Marseilles port today. The port of Marseilles is more lively than ever, with all kinds of vendors and characters gathered together. Today is the day when the French Navy sets sail. It's ridiculous to say that the French Navy is called a navy at this time, but in fact, it can't even beat the pirates in the Mediterranean Sea. It is a veritable army. Before Henry II gave the order, the French Navy had only 5 three-masted Spanish warships, the largest of which was only 1,000 tons. However, it must be known that England built the Sovereign as early as Henry VIII, which reached 1,500 tons, which is worthy of the name. Crushed the French army. Although Henry II's navy is not good, but he is rich, so under Henry II's heavy bleeding, even Venice, which has been invaded by the Ottoman Empire, sent 40 warships and 1,000 navy to support. Coupled with a large number of merchant ships recruited from the people, the French navy swelled like a blown air. In the end, the entire navy had more than 100 ships and more than 5,000 sailors, which seemed to be enough to crush the English navy. Although most of them were small boats with a tonnage of no more than 500, they were indeed bluffing, and Henry II was very self-aware. He hired the Venetian Admiral Leonardo Ferdi as the commander of the entire navy. General Ferdi, I hope God bless you, beat up those Englishmen. The bloated mayor of Marseilles smiled and looked at the handsome and tall Venetian general in front of him, and flattered him a little. You must know that His Majesty the King has high expectations of you. After the war is over, I think your prestige will spread throughout the Mediterranean coast and throughout Europe. Jacques Monnery, as the mayor of the municipality of Marseilles, has always been a slick and smooth figure. This time he not only completed the task assigned by the king very well, although the king cannot directly interfere with the specific affairs of Marseilles, it is easy to exert pressure. For the Venetian general in front of him, Mayor Monnery had no choice but to compliment him against his strong background, hoping to win over the relationship. Leonardo Ferdi's Ferdi family is a well-known merchant family in Venice. His family has more warships than France, and his business has spread all over Asia, Africa and Europe. Although Venice has declined a lot, the foundation is still deep. A little leak is enough for him to eat. Yes. I hope those savages in England don't disappoint me, Leonardo Ferdi said with a haughty expression, not paying attention to the Englishmen at all. To be honest, the current English navy can only bully the French, and in the eyes of a naval power like Venice, England is on the same level as France. The two stood on the deck, watching the battleships lined up in order from near to far. These fleets that were about to set sail gave them a lot of confidence. Your Excellency the Mayor promised to His Majesty the King on my behalf that I will not come back until I defeat the English. Feeling the thick and slightly salty sea breeze, the sound of seagulls twittering in his ears, as well as the deck shaking from time to time, and the sails bulging by the sea breeze, Ferdy can be sure that the sea is indeed his home field. Anyone can beat themselves. Oh, Your Excellency, since you are so confident, I will wait here for the news of your victory. Standing on the deck for a while, smelling the uncomfortable sea breeze, the Mayor of Marseilles was about to go down. Your Excellency, I hope you can come back with a big victory. I am here waiting for your good news. The Mayor of Marseilles got off the boat and looked at the fleet with tears in his eyes, looking affectionate. To be honest, Mayor Monnieri wished that the Venetian would fail, so that the strength of the Venetian would be reduced a lot. However, many of the merchant ships of the wealthy Marseilles merchants were requisitioned by Henry II, and even his families. If they fail, they will lose a lot. With such a tangled mood, His Excellency the Mayor watched the fleet leave at this time. A few pigeons flew away from the vicinity of the port, and everything else in the port was normal. The homing pigeons flew very fast. 8 hours later, the homing pigeons arrived in Paris. After that, several homing pigeons flew away from the sky in Paris. A few hours later, the homing pigeons safely arrived in Calais, the stronghold of England and France. After that, a small sailboat quickly ran out of the port of Calais, crossed the English Channel, and came to Hampshire, and then the information was passed to Edward. Major James, what do you think we should do? Edward looked at Major James with an uncertain face in front of him, and asked inquiringly, Your Majesty, it seems that the French are coming in menacingly. We can't fight forcefully, we can only focus on defense. James considered it for a while, carefully looked at Edward's face, and said slowly he was worried that Edward, who was young and energetic, would let the Navy directly fight the French army. Such a wrong decision made him embarrassed. That's why he seemed so hesitant. After all, such a method is very useless. Major James, I trust you. I don't know anything about the Navy. You are in charge of fighting the French army. Chapter 161 Operation Highlanders. Hearing what the young king said, James was stunned for a while, and then he praised Edward, a series of words, so that Edward himself was embarrassed before he was stopped. Mr. Major, if you have any needs, just tell me. A war is inevitable. Edward stared directly at Major James, was silent for a while, and then spoke seriously. Your Majesty, that's exactly what I'm asking for. James quickly got up and bowed to Edward, with a look on his face that he got what he wanted. I need a large number of ships, as well as a large amount of gunpowder and manpower to build a fortress. These are small things. In the name of the King, I now order the Scottish Privy Council to cooperate with you. In the future, if there is anything missing, to report directly to the Scottish Privy Council. I don't believe they dare to do anything under Minnows. As Edward spoke, his eyes became more and more fierce. He didn't believe that those Scottish nobles would dare to die now, and he didn't want to let the Scottish nobles bleed. Seeing the king in such a state, Major James was relieved, and then he saluted and went to work. Walking out of the Scottish royal palace, Major James rode his horse and walked quickly towards the port. Major James knew the French's goals very well. They were going to use their advantages to destroy the English navy in one fell swoop, or severely damage the English navy, so that their army could calmly land in Scotland and drive away the English army. Therefore, in the face of the current disadvantages, the navy can only adopt defensive attacks to respond to all changes without change. As long as the French army is not allowed to land, the army summoned by Henry II will be helplessly disbanded. After a long time will end in failure. After all, these people were all hired. After a long time, Henry II did not have the money to support so many idlers. As for the final defense, then the port of Edinburgh is very important. Edinburgh is located at the mouth of the east coast of Scotland, dominating the stretches of volcanic ash and rocky cliffs, so if there is no internal support, Edinburgh is almost difficult to conquer. The same is true for the port. The port of Edinburgh is like a low and flat area of a mountain, surrounded by steep rocks. As long as a few forts are built, it will be difficult for the French army to conquer the port. Even if they break their heads and why the French army must conquer Edinburgh, it is because of the coastal areas of Scotland. Only the port of Edinburgh is relatively flat, with a deep draft, and can dock hundreds of tons of cargo ships. While thinking about it, James is very confident that the French will return without success, and he can even take a few bites, capture a few warships, and expand the English navy. At this time, The various tribes on the Scottish Highlands began to act, and the entire Highlands seemed restless. The MacDonald tribe, which is the farthest away, has already begun preparations. The young and strong warriors fed their close horses, and whispered something in their ears from time to time. The young children also sensibly followed their mothers to help pack their father and elder brothers things for the expedition: cheese, dried beef, mutton, and precious weapons. Bronze swords or stone axes. These are the guarantees for soldiers to survive on the battlefield, so they have to be taken seriously. As mentioned earlier, Scotland lacks mineral resources, and the level of logging and forging is poor. Not to mention iron. Even bronze is a rare weapon for the Highlanders. Getting a bronze weapon is the best gift of coming of age. Although Adair, who is 18 years old this year, was the chief's son, he had been on the battlefield since he was 14 years old, and he had almost spent the past 4 years on the battlefield. Fight other tribes for food and slaves, fight lowlanders for wealth and food, fight wolves to protect family and tribe. The blood of war is already flowing in his veins, and he always wants to be a warrior like his father. Father, why didn't you let me participate this time? As a famous warrior in the tribe, Adair couldn't understand why his father didn't let him participate in the activity of robbing the lowlanders, so he went directly to his father's tent, questioned, "Am I not brave enough? Did I do something wrong?" He didn't know that he was not on the team until the night before departure, which made him very uncomfortable. But the tribal leader Ronald was very calm in front of his son, wiping a sharp iron sword in his hand over and over again, concentrating on it. "I know what you want to say. The tribe also needs someone to watch the house." Ronald gently stroked the iron sword in his hand, which he had bought for 20 wolf skins, and he had always cherished it. He also knew about his son's distress. After he finished speaking, a sentence that was neither salty nor bland came out. "But, why am I the housekeeper? I am the bravest warrior in the tribe, and I am the most needed in the expedition team. For this reason Adair declined. Because you are the #1 warrior in the tribe, I let you stay in the tribe to protect your brothers, sisters, and mother. I don't want to hear the news that the tribe was attacked and suffered heavy losses after the expedition. Understand?" Ronald put down the iron sword in his hand, stared at Adair's eyes and said, there was unquestionable information in his eyes. "Besides, our ancestors told us that there will be no lambs in the world that will automatically run into the sheepfold. With you here, I can rest assured." Finally, Ronald patted his son's shoulder fiercely, picked up the iron sword, and walked out of the tent. Adair opened his mouth, speechless. After Ronald came out, a warrior walked out of almost every tent, a real Highland warrior. After waiting for about 10 minutes, more than 300 people gathered behind Ronald. These are warriors recognized by the tribe. Each of them has at least 3 scars on their faces or bodies, and their average age is 30 years old. Left and right, it is the golden age of men stepping on his horse. Ronald walked out of the camp slowly with more than 300 Highland warriors behind him. At this time, the Campbell tribe, who had already heard the news in advance, gathered a team of 200 people and had arrived in the Glasgow area. "Leader, look, let's get started. I can't restrain the desire in my heart." The Campbell tribe was ambushing outside a village at this time, looking at the village with no lights and no one patrolling in front of them. One of the bald warriors said to the tribe leader eagerly, "Yes. Let's go together. Let's be happy together today." At this time, the tribal leader couldn't hold back his shouting, and the flesh on his face was shaking, which was very scary. Immediately, the village was flooded by more than 200 Highland warriors. The sounds of dogs barking, babies crying, and women's crying sounded in this peaceful village. "Ask for a ticket. Ask for a monthly ticket." Chapter 162. Calling for help. Glasgow is the most prosperous city in Scotland. According to medieval practice, Glasgow is also an autonomous city. Except for paying taxes to the king on time every year, everything is managed by the self-governing committee. As the mayor elected by the self-governing committee, Atkinson is extremely satisfied with the current situation. His family is not only one of the few merchant families in Glasgow, with thousands of acres of pastures under their control, but also a number of political forces in the self-governing committee sitting on a mahogany chair made in England, drinking wine imported from France, using olive oil extracted from Italy, eating golden roasted leg of lamb, and yellow soft bread smeared with honey. The plump figure on the side, with 2 large white and juicy fruits hanging on it. But the nimble young maid used her tender hands to cut a leg of lamb into pieces with a knife, and then sent them to the respected Mayor. Atkinson took the delivered mutton and let it come into intimate contact with the spices on the plate. When it turned red, Atkinson put the mutton into his mouth with satisfaction. In this way, Atkinson enjoyed his breakfast with a full face, touching the plump maid's big buttocks from time to time, It was a really happy day. Akison couldn't help thinking about it, when suddenly an official of the city government whom he trusted asked to see him as a mayor. He hated working at home the most, but he had no choice but to be his right-hand assistant in the city government, and he couldn't see him when everyone was here. Clean these up, Minger. Dung, cursed angrily, and Akison stretched his brows, maintaining his composure. Afterwards, when he walked into the living room, he saw a thinner figure with a smile on his lips, and walked over slowly. "Oh, Clyde, my loyal assistant, it's a pleasure to meet you." As soon as Atchison's voice sounded, that thin back quickly turned around. A middle-aged man with a pale face and bloodshot eyes looked at Akison. His lips were murmuring something. After seeing Akison, Clyde seemed to see the support, and quickly walked over. No, he ran over, and said in a panic, "Your Excellency, the big thing is not good. Highlanders come here already." Akison looked at the abnormal assistant a little strangely. "What did you say? Say it again. You're not joking, it's not funny at all." When the assistant mentioned the Highlanders attacking Glasgow, Atchison's face was full of disbelief, his lips trembling, and his hands shaking. The assistant asked in a panic, "Ahem. Mayor, according to reliable information, 3 groups of Highland barbarians attacked the border village yesterday, and according to some merchants, most tribes in the Highlands are restless, and there is a possibility of collective action." Clyde felt a little uncomfortable being shaken by his shoulders, but he still told the news he knew in detail when asked by his immediate superior. After hearing Clyde's words, Akison was 90% sure that it was true, but all of this was still so unbelievable. "You know, Glasgow hasn't been invaded by Highlanders for nearly 30 years. Hurry up to notify the members of the Self-Government Committee to hold a meeting. It is a catastrophe for our city of Glasgow." Mayor Akison was a little lost. After a while, he immediately reacted and ordered, "Yes, Your Excellency." Clyde bent down, expressing his understanding. A meeting of the Glasgow City Council followed. "Everyone, the Highlanders are less than 20 miles away from Glasgow. I think we have to make a quick decision." Mr. Kenyon, the chairman of the Self-Government Committee, said to a member of the House of Representatives with a serious face, and said in a deep voice. His cloudy and sharp eyes swept over the members sitting, and then he sat down slowly. "Kenyon has been the chairman of the Self-Government Committee for more than 20 years. He has a lot of authority in the whole Self-Government Committee, and his power is much stronger than that of Akison, the nominal mayor." He clearly told the members of the committee who opposed him that this is not the time to fight for power. "Gentlemen, according to the survey, the Highlanders may be engaged in large-scale activities this time. The tribes that have been discovered so far include Campbell, Grant, Fisher, Cameron and other tribes. As for the MacDonald, the largest tribe in the Highlands, they are still missing, but we believe that they are still coming back, and they are just on the way now." After the presentation, Akison sat down with a tactful, "And now is the time for other congressmen to express their opinions. In this way, this time must be the biggest turmoil among the Highlanders in 30 years. We must be ready to welcome those nobles who have fled. In this way, the price of bread may increase again." The navigator, another representative of the political forces in the committee, Keith, is a well-known merchant marine leader in Glasgow. He likes sailing the most, and hates the nobles the most. He thinks most nobles are trash, useless. As soon as this sentence fell, there was a burst of laughter in the meeting. The members were very happy to see the nobles deflated. "Yes, I will definitely arrange it," Akison said as he sat there. "Everyone, we need to know one thing. The Highlanders are a bunch of savages and lunatics. Although Glasgow's city walls are relatively strong, they are still far behind Edinburgh. To be safe, let's ask Edinburgh for help." A middle-aged man who looked thinner said something slowly, and then closed his mouth. Akison glanced at him and knew that he was a good guy in the committee, and he was also a well-rounded person, who looked sick all day long and looked like he would not live long. But even if he was hanging like that, after 10 years, he still looked like he was about to die, and the others got used to it. "Yes. Although we have a self-defense army of nearly 2,000 people, it is still difficult to fight those Highland barbarians. Even if it is to defend the city, yes. To be on the safe side, let's go to Edinburgh for help." Immediately, members of Congress spoke one sentence at a time, and the general meaning was to ask Edinburgh for help. "Okay, since everyone thinks so, let's ask Edinburgh for help." Kenyon thumped the table to explain. "Mr. Akison, the city government has sent someone to bring the taxes for the first half of the year to see Edward VI, who is already the King of Scotland. I think he, who is already the co-lord of Scotland and England, should send troops over," Kenyon said to Akison earnestly, his tone unquestionable. "Yes, sir, I will obey the committee and send to Edinburgh." Akison bent slightly, and replied somewhat respectfully, "There's only one chapter today. My uncle passed away at the age of 82. Summer, the weather is threatening. Some busy work at night. Finally ask for a ticket." If you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelis. There you'll find the original version of this story, and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We're waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels. Chapter 163 Support. Your Majesty the King. According to news, the Highlanders have begun to approach Glasgow. Not only have several manors been attacked, but countless villages have been burned, killed and looted. The entire city is completely immersed in panic, and only you, the Blessed One of God, the common sovereign of Scotland and England, the great Edward VI, can save the 50,000 citizens of Glasgow. So, with the expectation of the whole city, with the admiration for you, and with the opinions of the Glasgow City Self-Government Committee, I, the envoy of Glasgow City, Kevin, come to meet the great monarch. Edward sat quietly in his own chair, listening to the eloquent middle-aged man in front of him who claimed to be the messenger of Glasgow. The middle-aged man was wearing a gentlemanly and graceful rough collar, but he humbly lowered his head slightly and talked to Edward without pausing. Which shows that he was sent to meet Edward for a reason. The figure of the middle-aged man is somewhat plump, which shows that he is from an upper-class background, either an aristocrat or a wealthy businessman. The average Scot is not so good at creating and maintaining such a figure. The two eyebrows are a little sparse, making people laugh out of thin air. In order to establish majesty, he has two thick beards on his lips, wears a black tall hat, and has a humble smile on his face. As a messenger, he's still qualified. At least Edward didn't feel disgusted with him. Your Majesty, in order to express your congratulations on becoming the co-lord of Scotland, and also to express your submission to you, Your Majesty, the mayor asked me to bring the tax revenue of the entire city of Glasgow for the first half of the year to congratulate you on. Your Majesty. The messenger Kevin narrowed his eyes, slowly raised his head, and carefully observed the Scottish co-lord in front of him. I saw a boy about 13 or 14 years old, wearing a purple cloak, a black jacket mixed with gold on the upper body, fluffy shorts on the lower body, and white tweed socks from heel to knee. High heels studded with gold and precious stones. A dagger was slung around his waist, and the sheath of the sword was also inlaid with gems of various colors. From Kevin's point of view, the young His Majesty the King held great power, and his immature face was full of awe-inspiring majesty, which made him murmur in his heart, Your Excellency, I don't know how much tax money Glasgow has brought, so don't let me down. Edward listened to the middle-aged envoy in front of him babbling a lot. The central meaning was to ask for help, and he also brought money to ask for help, so at least he was sincere. But if the tax is too small, even the military expenses can't be solved. Then leave the money and get out. As for Glasgow being attacked by Highlanders, anyway, Glasgow is a municipality in the future, and Edward has no obligation to help it expel the Highlanders. Edward said these words with a smile in his mouth, which made Kevin deeply see the king's shamelessness. What the king meant was that if the money brought did not satisfy him, nothing would be discussed. Your Majesty, according to the agreement signed between the city of Glasgow and the King of Scotland, every month, the autonomous city needs to pay the king a ransom of 1,000 francs as a condition for the autonomy of the city of Glasgow. So, I brought 5 months' ransom money from the first half of this year, and came to Edinburgh. At that time, 1 franc was equal to 1 livre, that is, 1 pound, 5,000 pounds in 5 months. How much was that? Edward believed that this was only 1 month's tax in Glasgow, Scotland's largest commercial city. Since London was abolished by Edward, the monthly tax in London is nearly £10,000. This is just the tax standard set by the London Self-Government Committee. Although Scotland is a little poorer, Glasgow is the largest port city in Scotland, with less than 100 merchant ships entering and leaving the port every day, and Edward's low estimate of £5,000 per month. This kind of behavior of sending beggars made Edward a little uncomfortable, but this was an agreement signed by the former King of Scotland. They were used to being poor, so they were very rare about this money. Suddenly, Edward thought of a good idea. Your Excellency, with all due respect, the £5,000 is considered a ransom, but if I want to send troops, I must pay the real employment fee. Edward had the audacity to write off the ransom, and talk to the messenger about the employment fee. Regarding Edward's shamelessness, Kevin was also speechless. You must know that the previous ransom money was directly handed over to the Parliament, and then the Parliament decided to divide it into 2 halves, with the king and the nobles getting half. This time it was directly handed over to Edward, which has violated the convention. Who knew it would be wiped out, which made people speechless. Fortunately, it was well prepared, Your Majesty. Those are just greetings, and we have also decided to pay £5,000 to hire your army to drive out the Highlanders. Kevin held back his breath, and with a more humble look on his face, he said to Edward, how can I, as co-lord of Scotland and England, ignore the imminent attack of the Highlanders on the city of Glasgow? Edward stood up and spoke righteously, and an image of caring for the people emerged. I decided to send 1,500 people tomorrow to help the suffering people of Glasgow, to fulfill my duty as the King of Scotland. Seeing the indignant expression on the young king's face, Kevin had to admit that nobility's shamelessness is innate, regardless of age. May God bless you, Your Majesty the great king. On behalf of the people of Glasgow, I would like to express my gratitude for your military assistance. With a look of surprise on Kevin's face, he bowed to Edward with joy and performed the scene well. After that, Edward summoned the Earl of Wellington and Major Deal, who had surrendered from France. Good day, Your Majesty. Good day, Your Majesty. The two were a little puzzled about Edward's summoning, but they still saluted Edward sternly. Your Excellency, and Mr. Deal, the city of Glasgow asked me, the King of Scotland, for help just now, and I did agree. Edward looked at the two of them, then said casually, although they didn't know what His Majesty the King meant, they still acted as if they were listening. Mr. Deal, I also heard from Earl Wellington about your ability, so you have the confidence to lead an army to support Glasgow. Edward turned to Major Deal, who was a little nervous, and asked immediately, Your Majesty, as long as you believe in me, dealing with those barbarians is nothing to me. Major Deal didn't expect that he still had a mission. What does this represent? It represents the king's trust and attention, so he patted his chest and said excitedly. Chapter 164, The Waves Before the Storm. Very good, Mr. Deal, I hope you will not disappoint me. Edward looked at Major Deal and said with a sigh, to be honest, Edward didn't value this support operation at all, and the reason why he wanted to send troops there was to see the real Highland fighters. The second is to fulfill the responsibility of the King of Scotland, so that he will not follow the truth. Third, that is to see how capable this Frenchman is and whether he is worth that pointing. To be honest, Edward is still holding the title of King of France, but he knows very little about France, and he doesn't know the terrain, especially after Henry VIII personally conquered France for so many years. The generals of the expedition were either dead or old. It was tantamount to dreaming to expect them to conquer France again at this time. Diogenes Coslander entered his eyes. First of all, he betrayed King Henry VIII of France, which caused France to completely lose the ally of Scotland, and also allowed Edward to enter Edinburgh, directly giving him the crown of the King of Scotland. Not to mention that he indirectly caused Henry VIII to lose the daughter-in-law of Queen Mary, and the dream of combining France and Scotland was ruined. Therefore, the current Dio can still be trusted, but his ability is unknown. Therefore, Edward will have to see how good he is this time. If it's okay, he will be the pioneer when the French Civil War comes. If the mud can't support the wall, then let him be a baron and make a sign to reduce the resistance to marching into France in the future. I thought about it in my heart, but Edward still had a smile on his face. As always, Mr. Deal, you will be the leader of the 1,500 reinforcements. After hearing these words, Major Deal felt relieved, and promised with an excited face, Your Majesty, please rest assured, I will not let you down. Major Deal knew that leading the army this time was a fork in his destiny. If he did a good job, he might integrate into the England system and no longer be an idle baron. Remember, you are here to support. If there is no danger in Glasgow this time, that is, if there is no danger of being breached, try not to contribute. You can station around it. If the people in Glasgow insist on you sending troops, remember you must ask for military expenses and supplies, as much as you can. Anyway, you can't afford less, Edward said without hesitation in front of Earl Wellington, without any sense of shame. Yes, Your Majesty. Although Major Deal felt a little disgusted in his heart, he couldn't ignore the king's order. Okay, let's go down quickly, time is running out, we will start tomorrow. Edward waved his hand and drove away. Major Deal directly, Your Excellency, the French are coming. Before the navy is wiped out, the French army will not land on a large scale, but just in case, you still have to be prepared and conduct strict inspections. Edward's voice became more and more cold, and his eyes were also full of anger. Also, Scotland has been an ally of France for so many years. I think there must be many people, even nobles, who are plotting how to cooperate internally and externally, and even set off a riot directly to capture this big fish alive and give credit to their master, and now you have to cooperate with Dark Blade and crack down on this disgusting behavior. After you catch it, You will be punished for murdering the king. All property will be confiscated." Edward's tone was slow at first, as if he was talking about a trivial matter, but when it came to dealing with it, he was very decisive. "Yes, Your Majesty, it is my honor to serve you." Although I felt a little bit about the king's cruelty in my heart, he was not the one who died, so there was no need to plead with the king for them. Earl Wellington's expression changed. He closed his lips, and his eyes became more serious. Edward was somewhat satisfied with the Earl's sense of taste. For the upcoming naval battle, Edward had to stop the whole of Edinburgh for a while. Seeing that there was nothing wrong with him, the Earl stepped back consciously. Edward couldn't help but cast his eyes out of the window over there. Pedestrians coming and going and peddlers shouting and shouting together weave a picture scroll of ordinary life in the Middle Ages, which is plain and full of life. However, Edward knew that this was only the surface. These were just the calm before the storm. The sky gradually dimmed, and the heat that originally radiated from the air in Edinburgh also slowly dissipated. With the slow rise of the cold air, the pedestrians on the road became less and less, and Edinburgh officially entered the night. Different from modern times, in the 16th century, candles were still a luxury item, and only nobles and limited wealthy merchants had the money to use them. In this ordinary period, ordinary civilians could only start the journey of making people. A little bit of starlight shines in the big castle of Edinburgh, and there is a mansion in it, and the lights look brighter and brighter. "Your Excellency, currently 30 nobles have agreed to support us, and 15 of them have agreed to send servants to join our crusade." A mellow voice sounded in the hall, and the joy could be heard. "Feelings, yes, in a few days, that little king will get out of England in disgrace." "Ha ha ha." Another loud voice with some tinge came out, and his tone was full of joy. Bob was used to these voices. Since a group of people came to the mansion a few days ago, his master, Baron Gordon, was happily discussing something with him. He didn't understand these things. As a young servant who lived in the Baron's mansion since he was a child, he has always regarded obedience as the standard for his master and never dared to resist. However, ever since this group of people came to the mansion, they had a lot of fish and meat every day, held banquets almost every day, and seeing so much expenses every day, he couldn't help feeling sorry for his master. And he also heard that there are as many as 10 sheep being killed every day guarding the door. Bob tilted his head. He couldn't help but worry about his master. His eyes began to drift away. Suddenly, he noticed a soldier in armor appeared in front of him, holding a spear in his hand. The sharp tip of the spear was shining brightly in the dark night, with a murderous look. "You, who are you?" "This is Baron Edgar's mansion. Leave quickly. Otherwise, I will make you look good." Looking at the dozens of spears in front of him, Bob threatened sternly. Stuttering a bit, the leading officer didn't care about the gatekeeper, so he was dragged away, opened the brightly lit room, and forced his way in. "Who are you? Don't you know my mansion here?" The young man standing in the middle shouted loudly. "Of course I know. You are Baron Edgar." The leading officer smiled without thinking at all. "I'm looking for you." Seeing the relaxed look on the faces of the rest of the people, the leading officer said again, "Of course, there are all of you. Congratulations, you will be arrested for murdering the king. See you on the guillotine." Chapter 165 Preparation. The first update. I don't know if everyone doesn't like to watch it. The subscriptions are getting less and less, and the same is true for recommendation tickets. Alice, the city of Le Havre, was founded in 1517 and was called François City at the time. Fort means port of grace, and Le Havre means port or wharf. The geographical location of Le Havre is very important. It is the mouth of the Seine River, on the brink of the English Channel, 200 kilometers away from Paris, and is the maritime gateway of the capital Paris. Due to geographical factors and its own good conditions, it soon became the #1 port in France, and it was also the port of call for the French expeditionary force from afar. On June 5, 1549, after 8 days of sailing and 2 days of repairs, the total size of the fleet reached more than 150 ships, and the number of people reached more than 5,000. It can be said that the French army at this time was stronger than England. Quite a lot. Some private single-masted trading ships confiscated from France, as well as the single-masted Kirk ships and 2-masted Carrack ships brought by the Venetians from the Mediterranean, constituted the majority of the French army, and the real main force in the army comes from the Galen ship. This behemoth, after Spain established its colonies in the Americas, it needed to carry a large number of goods and soldiers across the Atlantic Ocean. The main seagoing ships at that time, the houseboat and the caravel, were no longer up to such an arduous task, so the Spaniards combined the advantages of these two types of ships and invented the Galen ship. Because the Galen ship can not only be used as a battleship during wars, but also as a cargo ship in peacetime, it can be said to serve multiple purposes. Therefore, it became the mainstream of Western ships in the 16th and 17th centuries. Galley ships generally have 4 masts. The front 2 masts are hung with rail sails, and the rear 2 masts are hung with jib sails. The standard length is 46 meters 55 m, and the displacement is 300 to 1,000 tons as the expedition fleet to Edinburgh. There are about 10 galley ships of 800 tons in the French army, and 3 main warships of more than 1,000 tons, namely the 1,300-ton Rose and the 1,000-ton Sea Ship Princess, and the largest 1,500-ton Hunter. These are the main forces in the decisive battle. As for why the tonnage of the Venetian ships is small, it's not because Venice's ability to build ships is not good, but because it's unnecessary. The French's employment costs can only be worth so much, and this is because the Venetian parliament sees it in the face of the French king serving size wearing a white shirt inside, a blue cape on the outside, a monocular telescope on his waist, and a black gold-plated chick navy cap on his head. The commander of the navy, Renardo Ferdi, "Look, the spirit is very good. Starting today, he will wage a naval war with those Englishmen." This is also the first time that the Venetians have waged a war with a country outside the Mediterranean due to the need to face the aggression of the Ottoman Empire. Venetian merchants generally would not let the navy leave the Mediterranean. Who knows if the Ottomans will take the opportunity to attack. Therefore, even though Venice has more than 3,000 ships and more than 30,000 sailors, he still has not led the navy to the Mediterranean Sea. This is a rare experience. As for the difference between the Atlantic Ocean and the Mediterranean Sea, Renardo felt it immediately after entering the Atlantic Ocean. If Mediterranean Sea is a calm middle-aged man, except for losing his temper from time to time, the rest of the time is calm. The Atlantic Ocean is like a teenager, emotionally unstable. Big waves are commonplace, and typhoons come from time to time, so the level of danger is much higher. Therefore, facing such an unfamiliar sea area at this time, Renardo is still a little uncomfortable, and what worries him even more is that those Kirk ships and Carrack ships brought from the Mediterranean Sea are all sailing ships, unable to cope with Atlantic winds. Fortunately, according to his observations, the sailors are currently adapting well to the Atlantic Ocean and can fight. So, at his order, more than 150 ships put on their sails, and under the agitation of the sea wind, they slowly headed for Edinburgh. At this time, Major James, the naval commander, was not idle at this time. At his request, Edward, in the name of himself and Mary, asked the Scottish Navy and civilian ships to join the English Navy and resist the French fleet from afar. As a country bordering the sea, Scotland also has a navy. With the encouragement of James IV and James V, Scotland aggressively expanded its navy. At its largest, it had 38 ships of various types, the largest of which had reached 1,500 tons. But now everything has become history. There are currently more than 30 ships of various types in the Scottish Navy, but most of them are backward Kirk ships, and the largest scale has reached 800 tons, at most as auxiliary ships. Major James doesn't care about these things. The more strength he has at this time, the more certainty of victory he will have. Moreover, under the command of Edward and the persuasion of Major James, more than 20 merchant ships from Scotland and 50 merchant ships from England joined the battle. Therefore, the English Navy is currently expanding rapidly, with more than 130 ships of various types, comparable to the French. Unlike most of the Venetians who are galleys, most of England's ships are sail warships. That is to say, the wind is the main force, and the sails are the auxiliary, so they are more maneuverable since most of them are wind-powered warships. The total number of combatants in England has also climbed to more than 3,000, which is almost double the number. But the number of direct combat is about the same. After doing all this, Major James was relieved until June 6, and brought his fleet to the agreed place, waiting quietly in front of the port of Edinburgh, ready to have a battle with the French naval battle. Of course, there are still reasons for changing the tortoise plan formulated in the early stage. After calculation and investigation of the information, most of the galley ships of the French expeditionary fleet that came from afar have not been modified, that is, the ram angle in front of the ship has been changed to a cannon. Moreover, I don't know if the Venetians have fought more wars with the Ottoman Empire. The firepower on their ships is not strong, and they are better at ship landing operations, that is, direct collisions and attacks between ships. In this way, the advantage of England's naval artillery is much greater. After thinking for a while, Major James suddenly saw a large number of fleets slowly appearing on the horizon like dark clouds, which gave people a strong sense of depression. Notify all captains, get ready, the Venetians are coming. After saying a word to the orderly beside him, James saw a small black dot and ran over. Taking a closer look, A frigate with a French flag appeared in the distance. Chapter 166, Last Stand. The origin of the name frigate can be traced back to the Middle Ages. At that time, in order to avoid being intercepted by enemy countries or being followed by spies, diplomatic envoys would take a fast boat called frigate and quickly go to the place where they wanted to negotiate to carry out diplomatic missions. In order to perform this time-sensitive special task, the frigate ship was built to be slender and streamlined, so it has excellent sailing ability and flexibility, enough to escape the pursuit of all pirates or enemy navies. Therefore, when Major James saw the arrival of the frigate, he knew that it was the arrival of the French envoy. "Tell me, what is your mission?" Major James asked with a straight face. "Not identified, Your Excellency. General Feedy asked me to tell you that it is still too late to surrender." The envoy was a little apprehensive in the face of James, who was making a face, and his tone was quick. "Tell your generals, it's still too late for you to surrender, otherwise, you will bear the consequences," Major James sneered, then drove away the messenger in front of him. His eyes followed the returning frigate, and slowly reached the huge lineup on the opposite side. The cold and icy deck was full of Venetian sailors. Unlike the English, there were not only archers and musketeers among them, but also soldiers with long guns and scimitars. The deck is full of bows and arrows, black oil and grenades, and even fishing guns and fishing nets. The soldiers all had ferocious expressions and strong bodies. They didn't look like the Navy, but the Army. 3 huge gallant ships were ahead. Their tall and icy sides were like spears from hell, heading straight for the English Navy. After that, more than a dozen small gallant ships, huge carrack ships, and slow Kirk ships followed behind, followed by various sloops and small Kirk ships, and the patrol boats wandered among them, giving the opposite side. James and his team brought a great sense of shock on the England side. There are only 2 1,000-ton Sovereign of the Seas and Henry VIII, and the main combat ships are all kinds of small Galenic ships and carrack ships. Merchant ships, compared with the uniform Venetians. Can you not be frightened? The cold sea breeze blew the sails and made a sound, and the unique salty smell in the air rushed into his nostrils, bringing James back to his senses. "What are you afraid of? We are fighting at home and they are in an unfamiliar sea. They should be afraid of us." James saw the eyelids of the first mate on the boat twitch, his feet were trembling, and he looked terrified. Turning around to look again, most of the sailors on the ship were the same, with fear on their faces, and the retreat in their eyes was obvious. Immediately, Major James stomped the deck and said sharply, "Yes, my lord." Surprised by Major James, the beard on the face of the first mate next to him trembled, and he immediately responded and agreed. "Hurry up, Shells, get ready to speed up, and put the sail back a little." The first officer was reminded, and immediately started working, yelling loudly at the equally dazed sailors. Major James is at the forefront of the whole, that is, on the flagship Sovereign of the Sea, commanding the navy behind. As the Sovereign of the Seas moved forward slowly, various merchant ships and the English and Scottish navies behind them also slowly followed. Soon, the distance from the French fleet was less than 3 miles, and dense figures on the deck could be vaguely seen on the other side. The General of Venice, Leonardo Ferdi, as the coach of the French army, also saw the slowly approaching English navy go at full speed. "Tell the whole army, join as much as possible. Board the ship directly when you are closer to the English, and wipe out the English in one fell swoop." Leonardo, who kept his eyes on the front, saw the English navy slowly moving forward, couldn't help being overjoyed, and ordered loudly the savages of England, "I want to show you what the Venetian navy is." Looking at the English ship in front of him, Leonardo had a smile on his lips, and his eyes became sharper. The Venetian navy is the same as the navy of this era. Whether it is in the west or in the east, the way of combat is to board ships. For them, the ship is just a sea castle. Their purpose is to board the enemy ship, and then use the number of people to die, so as to achieve victory. For the English navy with a small number of people, it is indeed difficult to win. But to call Edward a time traveler? In order to increase the power of the artillery, that is, to prevent the French army from approaching, Edward directly granulated the gunpowder of the British army. The so-called granulation means mixing water, pressing it into a cake, breaking it with a wooden stick and sprinkling some charcoal on it. For example, the ships of the British army are currently equipped with light guns, with a range of about 2,500 yards, or more than 2,200 meters. If it is granulated, the range will reach about 2,500 meters, and its power will increase up a layer. In addition, the British army has a lot more artillery than the French army, so that the French army can't get close. According to the arrangement, all the English navy did not go up together like in the past, but stopped when they were 2 kilometers away from the French army. Then all the ships were laid out together, and the ships turned sideways, so that the other side was directly facing the French army, and all the light guns and artillery were concentrated on one side of the ship, waiting for the order of Major James to fire together. This kind of combat plan is also very risky. If the French army survives the 2,000 meters of death, then the English army will not be able to organize an escape. Coupled with the French army's numerical advantage, it will be that this is a last stand, and the test is actually the will of the Venetians and the degree of love for their ships. In fact, such behavior is currently inappropriate. First, the artillery is not very powerful and does not do much damage. The second is that seagoing ships cannot withstand the recoil of multiple artillery salvos. Only at the end of the 17th century, when the Spanish galleon was improved and became a sailing battleship, that is, after the birth of the battleship, could such a row of artillery be truly realized. In order to solve the recoil problem, Major James not only temporarily strengthened the ship, but also fixed the artillery on the deck, just to defeat the greatest enemy of the English Navy ever on the other side. Seeing the English Navy on the opposite side put on such a posture, it made General Renardo, who had commanded the Navy for decades, puzzled. Isn't this going to kill you? What are the Englishmen doing? What's the purpose? Everything in front of him made the Venetian general suspicious. He looked up and looked back. All the warships behind him had fully raised their sails and turned on the maximum acceleration mode. It was too late to stop them. That's it. I don't believe that under such circumstances, you can come back, unless God blesses you. With a sneer, Renardo directly directed his flagship to pounce on it. Due to the sharp decline in subscriptions and tickets since the expedition to Scotland, it can only end as soon as possible. Ask for tickets. Ask for subscription. Chapter 167, Sea Battle. Your Excellency, are you sure this method is feasible? While concentrating on observing the approaching French ships, there was a timid voice from the side. It is absolutely feasible. This is planned and implemented with the hard work of His Majesty the King. It is basically foolproof. Faced with such a question, Major James did not turn his head, and said with certainty, which was very contagious. The hesitant voice still came from behind James, a man with a big beard, wearing a different red uniform from Major James. His military uniform is white with a little bit of blue. Facing the binoculars with his right eye, there was unconcealable worry in the dark blue eyes, and the wrinkles on his face that looked like mountains and ravines looked more and more profound. Now, as Scotland's Minister of the Navy, generally speaking, he does not need to enter the naval battle. Usually, he only needs to assign tasks and stay in his office. But Edward was worried that the Scottish Navy would not cooperate. You must know that at the critical moment of this decisive battle, a small loophole is enough to determine the outcome. So Edward threw the Minister of the Navy to James, thus making the minister a hostage, half coercion, half order to let the Scottish Navy obey the command without looking back. Major James knew that the minister behind him was probably scared to pee. That's right, the Scottish Navy usually struggles to wipe out pirates. When has it ever seen a sea battle like this? In fact, Major James kept praying to God in his heart. He has been in the Navy for more than 10 years. At most he has bullied pirates and the French offshore navy. He has never commanded or seen such a large naval battle. Forcibly suppressing the timidity in his heart, Major James concentrated his mind and silently estimated the distance of the French army. Like Major James, who was on the flagship of the Sovereign of the Sea at this time, Major Charles on the other battleship Henry VIII was also nervous. Unlike Major James, who was born in the aristocracy, just like the meaning of Charles' name, he was born in a peasant family, that is, the yeoman family, a family of yeoman farmers relying on his own efforts. He became a high-level officer in the English Navy, and he also became an officer leader from the civilian class in the Navy, barely able to resist the aristocratic group led by James. Usually, he is a violent and reckless man who shows his loyalty, is approachable, and has no intentions. This is the evaluation of him in the Navy. If he had no scheming, how could he have climbed to the top of the Navy, which is almost a noble patent, and what he lives by is one word: careful. Before doing anything, he must carefully consider the arrangement and prepare for multiple moves, so that he can climb to this position. Marty. Damn, the simplification of Mardas. How can the group of Venetians be so fast? Let the gunners prepare, and notify the Scots to prepare for artillery fire. Seeing the French Navy approaching more and more, Charles felt like boiling water in his heart. He was anxious and hurriedly ordered, "Yes, Your Excellency, Captain." The young sailor who waited on the side quickly agreed, and then there was a sound of dang, 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 and the orderly began to wave the flag, asking the nearby ships to prepare. What the hell is James doing? It's this time, and he's still hiding it from me. Charles rolled his eyes, took a sip of his wine, stared straight ahead, and muttered, "At this time, The overwhelming French navy followed the waves of the sea, like Poseidon, the god of the sea in Greek mythology. Under the command of General Renardo, the French navy's attack shape was like a horizontal V. 3,000-ton giant ships braved the wind and waves, acting as sharp knives in front, ready to plunge into the chest of the English navy in one fell swoop. The United Navy of England is also in a V shape, but the direction is reversed, and the margin is shorter. The fleet is almost crowded together, and the distance between the ships is exaggerated to only 5 or 6 meters. If it is stuck, it cannot be withdrawn. It is almost a replica of CAO's serial plan in the Three Kingdoms period. Hurry up, get closer. Major James counted softly, eagerly watching the French navy arrive at the estimated distance at this time. Although the artillery of the English navy had a range of 2,500 meters, the real effective range was only more than 1,000 meters, which was close to 2,000 meters. After exceeding, it basically depends on luck, and General Ronaldo stayed on the Hunter at the forefront, in the cabin, staring fiercely at England's formation, frowning here, 3,000 yards, 2,900 yards, 2,800 yards, quick, launch. Looking at the French navy that was about to reach the range, Major James shouted loudly, especially the last sentence, launch, almost hysterical, screaming desperately. In the end, he even bent over and covered his stomach, as if he had exhausted all his strength, and sucked in the air with great gulps. His throat seemed to be hoarse after receiving the order. The Sovereign of the Sea was operated by the gunners who had already been waiting, with 12 light cannons on the deck and 14 cannons in the two-story open-air gun holes on the waterline, a total of 26 cannons, making a loud noise, with a puff of white smoke, and launching 26 big red iron eggs in unison. There were more than 24 white lines drawn in the air, like celestial maidens scattered flowers, flocking to the French ships sailing towards the English army. Boom, boom, boom. The roar reached the ears of the French sailors on the opposite side, and then the shells arrived as scheduled. Many French soldiers obviously felt that the hull began to sway, and they couldn't stand upright. They could even hear the sound of the aftermath of the shells hitting the hull in the flagship. General Renardo was also surprised by the sudden attack of the English navy, and then his footsteps swayed slightly, and he quickly returned to normal. As the Hunter is a 1,000-ton giant ship, this wave is nothing, and the ship quickly recovered ours. After tidying up his clothes, General Renaldo was about to ask the first mate about his losses in this area. At this time, louder cannons sounded in his ears, and then the hull began to move faster than last time. The shaking was even bigger, and he couldn't even stand firm, so he could only fall into the cabin without grace. Among the English army, the Sovereign of the Sea, which was farthest from the Hunter, began to fire when the French fleet sailed to 2,800 yards. Close to 2,500 meters when the nearest ship of the French Navy was only about 2,500 yards, 2,300 meters. All the English Navy fired together. Chapter 168 Naval Battle. After hearing the sound of Major James' flagship in the rear, Major Charles' eyelids trembled, his heart sank, and he said loudly with all his strength, "Fire!" Immediately, a total of more than 20 cannons on the deck and under the ship's side of the Henry VIII were fired at once, and the nearby Scottish Navy was only stunned for a moment, and then fired all at once immediately. A total of more than 130 ships, large and small, ignited gunpowder and fired shells together. At this moment, the sea surface on the side of the United Navy of England was covered by white smoke, just like the early morning fog covering the United Navy. The air was full of sulfur smell, which made some sailors' noses feel uncomfortable. From the perspective of the French army, countless sparks suddenly burst out from the English ships at this time, and then the smoke spread, and the originally small shells continued to magnify in their eyes. And this round of salvo, the recoil of the artillery, moved the entire United Navy ship back several dozen feet, and the distance between the ship and the ship was also out of thin air. Even some merchant ships and ships of the Scottish Navy were in disrepair for a long time, and the whole ship was almost torn apart by a salvo, so they could only slowly retreat and withdraw from the battle in the first round of salvo. Hundreds of ships and cannons fired together. It can be said that this is a scene, this time and space, that has never been seen before in historical naval battles. In the same minute, thousands of shells flew into the French ships with unrivaled power, under the surprised eyes of the Venetians and the French. At this moment, more than a dozen ships of the French army sank directly, and more than 30 ships were injured and damaged. And at this moment, the combatants who were densely packed on the deck and preparing for the boating battle were killed by the shells falling on the deck, and more sailors jumped into the sea to avoid this deadly attack. One strike. Of course, there are still a small number of people who were forced to jump into the sea. Most of them were shot down by the large splashes of the shells falling near the ship, or were shaken by the ship. This round of salvo by the British Army completely confuses the Venetians. Isn't it just boarding the ship to fight? When did naval battles change to artillery battles? When they were surrounded, their companions in the sea kept calling them, asking for support just as they were preparing to rescue. The United Navy of England started a second round of shooting at this time. The French army hadn't slowed down yet, perhaps because they were confused and forgot to slow down. There was an interval of nearly 3 minutes between the first round of salvo and the second round of salvo. Therefore, the hunter at the forefront of the French army was only 2,500 yards away from the farthest sovereign of the sea of the British army at this time, and the closest distance was only 2,200 yards. The last ship of the French army is only about 2,600 yards away from the nearest United Navy of England, which is completely within range. This time also the sovereign of the sea started firing, and then the entire United Navy also started a second round of salvo. Since there is no timer, and some artillery fuses are of different lengths, the salvo here refers to shooting within 1 minute. Due to the inexperience of the first salvo, some weakly reinforced light guns on the deck of some ships suddenly jumped up after firing shells, and rolled a few times, and some unlucky ones were even lightly thrown by such a jump. The cannon was crushed to death and wounded. It is said to be a light cannon, but it is only relatively speaking. At least it weighs hundreds of pounds, and it is extremely dangerous. Therefore, in the second round of salvo, many ships will directly press down with some stones or heavy cargo, and then let the sailors support them, so that they dare to continue to launch on the French side. In the gap time after the first round of salvo, General Renardo quickly got up from the cabin and directly let the hunter, who ordered himself to sit down, start firing shells. But the original shooting range was not reached, and the French army was not prepared for it for a while. So they had to hurry up and prepare after the second round of salvo by the coalition forces. Due to the closer distance and the dense artillery, the French army hit more than 50 ships, 39 of which sank directly, and 16 were seriously damaged. Unable to participate in the battle, staying put after 2 rounds of salvo, 53 ships in the French army were directly sunk, and 32 ships were severely damaged. In other words, only half of the original French expeditionary fleet of more than 150 ships can participate in the battle at this time, with a reduction of more than 50%. Of course, at this time, the British coalition forces have no way of knowing the loss of the French expeditionary fleet. The time is too short to count. General Rinaldo on the flagship didn't know the loss on his side, so he chose to fire directly after the second round of salvo. After the hunter fired directly, the remaining 70 or so intact ships and the more than 40 damaged ships that had not lost their artillery attack capabilities also chose to fire in this way. In the minutes between the second and third rounds of the English coalition forces, the English coalition forces also tasted the salvo. Thousands of shells with sparks rushed directly to the densely packed English coalition forces. At this time, Major Charles, who was looking at the chaotic, dire-stricken French expeditionary fleet with binoculars, happily thumped his chest covered with chest hair, laughing loudly. "Marty, I just said that these Venetians are fighting us to die, and it is true, God bless." Major Charles crossed himself, soothing his agitated little heart. The first officer on the side didn't tell that he had been cursing the street before, and ordered the sailors to steer the sailboat vigorously to escape from the battlefield. When the battle was unfavorable at this time, there was a loud noise on the deck suddenly, and a shell directly penetrated into the cabin with an eruption force, and stopped almost 8 feet, close to 2.4 meters, in front of Major Charles, directly interrupting the explosion. Prayer from Major Charles: "Oh my God. God bless, God bless, it's too dangerous." Major Charles was stunned for a moment, looking at the shells not far away, then wiped the cold sweat that was constantly coming out of his forehead, panting heavily. "Your Excellency, Major, are you okay?" The adjutant at the side walked over timidly, and said hello coquettishly. "It's okay, Marty, shoot those Venetian sons to death for me. Artilleryman, shoot me." This fight directly annoyed Major Charles. He came near the artillery and shouted, cursing at the gunner. As soon as the boss urged, the gunner hurriedly speeded up, cleaned the gun mouth, then put the shells into the gun, and ignited the gun. So, almost at the same moment, the 2 English battleships Sovereign of the Sea and Henry VIII launched together, and then England's third salvo came before the eyes of the Venetians. Chapter 169: Victory. This time, led by the Sovereign of the Sea and the Henry VIII, hundreds of ships flew towards the French camp with artillery shells, large and small, causing waves of crashing into the water, as well as large pieces of fire. The sound of planks crushing and destroying. The third round of shelling was fired almost immediately after the French bombardment. At this time, most of the French army was admiring their side's counterattack against the English coalition forces. Looking at the black smoke constantly rising in the distance, and even some sailors whose ships tilted and dived, they laughed unscrupulously, and just when they were proud, the shells of the British Allied forces came to them and fell straight into their ships in an instant. As the distance got closer and closer, the French army suffered more and more damage from the attack. Even the flagship Hunter was hit by 3 shells, and 2 big holes were broken on the deck. The shells easily tore through the fragile and thin deck and reached the interior of the hull, causing great casualties to the personnel of the Hunter. Moreover, one of the English shells directly hit the Hunter from the side of the ship, not only causing great casualties to the sailors operating the oars, furthermore, the shell created a large hole, conservatively estimated to be the size of a large gate. Due to the heavy casualties of the sailors and the large hole, the repair work has been delayed. The cave has more than doubled in size and is still expanding. I roughly estimated that there were originally more than 300 people on board, but now there are only more than 30 healthy people, more than 100 wounded, and more than 100 people who fell into the water. After the shelling, General Ronaldo had dust on his face, several holes in his clothes, his lips were bitten, and there was a trace of blood at the corner of his mouth. And the first officer of the Hunter, a young master from a wealthy businessman's family, came to Ronaldo's side with a limp at this time, and reported in a crying voice. On clothes. Facing the first officer's report with a hint of tears, Ronaldo still packed his clothes on his own. After listening, he turned his head and asked calmly, and then, faced with such a conversational tone from his boss, the young first officer was about to cry, and his voice became more and more decadent. Your Excellency, the Hunter has lost its ability to move. It is conservatively estimated that in half an hour, the Hunter will sink into this sea area. Clutching his right leg scratched by the blown wood chips, the first officer felt that he was really unlucky. He wanted to come here to try his military exploits, but who knew that he encountered a stubble? Well, not only was it a waste of money to buy the opportunity, but also looks like you have to pay a lot of money. Ronaldo would not know the remorse of the first mate next to him for losing money, but he also had mixed feelings in his heart. In other words, we can only surrender. After a while, such a sentence floated out of Ronaldo's mouth, and the young first officer could only nod slightly with a mournful face. Walking out of the cabin, Ronaldo looked at the dilapidated deck, the wailing sailors with missing arms and legs, and the corpses still bleeding with bright red blood. He found a safe and relatively clean place and looked around. I saw that the originally majestic and large-scale French expeditionary fleet was in a mess at this time. Since the 3 battleships above 1,000 tons have always been the pioneers ahead, only 1 Hunter is left at this time, and the other 2 went directly to the sea to fish, and the remaining ships, 800 tons. There are only 4 gallon ships left, of which 2.5 are in the water, and the rest of the ships were basically either emitting thick smoke or half of their bodies submerged in the water, and there were less than 20 ships left intact. He lost this naval decisive battle, lost to a well-known Europa troop, in the hands of the English, who were despised by Europa. Venice lost so many ships in this naval battle, and he didn't feel bad at all. With Venice's shipbuilding level, it can basically make up for the loss in less than a month. It's a pity that after this naval battle, his reputation in Venice may have plummeted, but at this time, on the side of the English Allied forces, Major James, who was sitting on the sovereign of the sea, was like a happy child, alive and kicking, with an exaggerated smile on his face, and he couldn't stop it. After laughing for a while, James rubbed his stiff face with his hands, and said to the messenger, "Notify me of all the ships, press them up, and force them to surrender. Now these ships are ours." The messenger also had a happy expression on his face, and he responded loudly happily, and then hurriedly gave orders, "These will all belong to us in England from now on." Holding a binoculars, Major James looked up with his right eye, looking at the Hunter and other ships emitting black smoke, drooling, and couldn't help but looking forward to the situation after the British Navy is strong. Subsequently, under the order of Major James, the United Navy ships that were able to move basically pressed up together, and the distance from the French ships was getting closer and closer. This sense of oppression was very scary. "First officer, let's surrender. We lost this time, and we will still be captured in the end if we resist on a 500-ton ship." Seeing the chief officer preparing to fire a gun, a veteran in his 30s persuaded him the captain of the ship was already dead, and the chief officer was left to decide. The first officer was just about to bombard the approaching English ship, but the veteran hurriedly stopped him. He didn't want to accompany the young first officer to die then. After hearing the persuasion, The young first officer hesitated for a while, then said in a dejected manner, "Surrender." Slowly, the ships hoisted a white flag, and then, as if by contagion, all surviving ships also hoisted white flags in surrender. In the end, the hunter seemed to be concerned about face, and when it was the last one, it raised the white flag to surrender. At this time in Edinburgh, the situation of the naval battle ahead seems to be known to the civilians, especially the strong strength of the French expeditionary force, which makes these Scots have no confidence in the United Navy of England. Most of the nobles and civilians in the city drove horse-drawn carts, donkey carts, and even small carts to the outside of the city, but Edward didn't stop them, and opened the city gate wide to let them go. After all, if the French army wins the naval battle, a military disaster in Edinburgh is always inevitable. Moreover, Edward himself also sent someone to drive a small boat to observe the edge of the battlefield. If the English fleet fell into disadvantage, he would quickly take the maiden little Lolly, sit in the carriage that had already been prepared, and return to England at high speed. At this time, in a secret room, Donald, Russell, Scott and the others who had already conspired were discussing happily. If you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelis. There you'll find the original version of this story, and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We're waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels. Chapter 170. Russell, my friend, what is the situation now? On the side, Donald, who has always been mature and prudent, asked anxiously like ants on a hot pot. The others also looked at Russell with doubts, and they also wanted to know what was going on now. Hearing this, Russell was sitting on a chair, feeling the focused gazes of other people, and could only give Donald and the others an embarrassed smile. The little king has never evacuated the English army guard in the city gate. The soldiers we have contacted dare not mobilize. After all, there are too few of them. After Edward arrived in England, he directly allocated hundreds of people to guard the gates of Edinburgh and the palace, and of course, the original defenders of Edinburgh. However, there were only more than 1,000 defenders of Edinburgh who had suffered the baptism of war, and most of the defenders had been detained in the barracks. Edward released another 300 people to maintain order in the Edinburgh market. After all, it is more convenient for the locals and the rest of the people. Edward were not idle. He asked some officers in England to train them continuously, and Edward also paid a lot of money to reward them. The money was from the Scottish treasury, trying to make them obey the command neutral. These 300 people are all locals, and the situation is not favorable to England. That's why our Russell is able to win them over. He's going to take back Edinburgh when the English flee. Alice. Hearing this, Donald and the others let out a long sigh, with disappointed expressions on their faces. Don't worry, I sent someone to observe on the edge of the naval battle. As long as the English fail, he will come and tell me quickly. Russell looked at the faces of the crowd, stood up, and said comfortingly, in this way, we can come first, and maybe go to the palace. We don't have many places to go there. With Russell's temptation like this, everyone sitting here fell into fantasy, with smiles on their faces. There are so many gold and jewels in the palace. Let's take any of them, and they are worth half of our net worth. Ho ha ho ha. When everyone fell into the ocean of fantasy, the upright Nigel waved his thick arms and said slobberingly, with the gold stars in his eyes, looking extremely eager, rude, savage. The others were awakened by his loud voice, and they spat in unison, but they didn't know what they were thinking. Back on the battlefield, the last hunter also raised the white flag, which indicated that the entire French expeditionary fleet had completely surrendered, and the French's attempt to destroy the English navy in one fell swoop was also shattered. Haha. Hello, General Ferdy. Stepping briskly, James boarded the flagship of the French expeditionary fleet, and also met the commander of the expeditionary fleet, Rinaldo Ferdy. There were several big holes on the deck of the Hunter, which made Major James, who was about to board the ship, feel distressed for a while. These are now belonging to the English Navy. The damage is so serious, how much will it cost to repair it? In this way, Major James received General Rinaldo while feeling distressed. Hello, Major Leo Shalai. Rinaldo was a little embarrassed, but he still bowed to Major James, and Major James returned the salute. I didn't expect that Your Excellency the Major would be so young. General Rinaldo looked at Major James, who was in his 30s, and said with emotion, your way of naval battle this time, I think it will definitely be the template for the future, and you are still so young? This really makes me feel very emotional. Looking at the admiring French commander, General Rinaldo, Major James couldn't help but feel joy in his heart. But he knew in his heart that these were the little king's ideas, and he was just an executor. Even so, Major James is still as happy as before, and he will definitely be famous in the history of naval warfare in the future. Your Excellency, General, is too much praise. I just changed the way a little bit. After all, you brought me a lot of pressure at that time, so I can only take a risky move." With a slight smile, James said modestly, looking at the well-dressed Renato. "Please, Your Excellency General, this ship may be a bit dangerous. Let's leave." Seeing that the hunter was still taking in water, Major James quickly made a gesture of invitation. "Thank you." After saying a word of thanks, General Renato unceremoniously boarded the Sovereign of the Sea. "Hurry up and pull the hunter on board the Sea Monarch and tow it away. Don't let it sink." Looking at the tonnage of the hunter and the constant water ingress, "It feels like a ship can't move. Come here too, let's pull together," Major James shouted as he watched the two passing ships nearby. Immediately, under the pull of the three ships, the hunter finally did not sink directly like the other 2,000-ton giant ships. In this way, on the sea, the English ships salvaged the French sailors who fell into the water, or dragged the French ships that were about to sink. They were busy until noon, and finally finished their work. In some sunken French ships can only be salvaged after a while. Your Majesty, victory, victory. The little maid Lucy ran over energetically, dripping with sweat, and said to Edward, who was sitting on the chair. "Really?" Edward stood up happily after hearing the news, and asked. "It's true, Your Majesty. Major James led the coalition forces to beat the French Navy to the ground, and won a big victory." Lucy nodded in confirmation, looking very cute. "Great, great." Edward turned around happily. An hour later, Major James also ran over, faced Edward, and knelt down on one knee. "Your Majesty, with God's blessing, our army has won a complete victory, and the French expeditionary fleet has now surrendered." "Very well, Major, you did not disappoint me." Edward walked over and helped Major James himself up, expressing great emotion to him. Afterwards, Edward suppressed his excitement, sat on a chair, and listened to Major James' detailed description, and then Major James introduced the gains of this victory. "Your Majesty, after a rough calculation, we captured one hunter of more than 1,000 tons, 4 galleon ships of 800 tons, and 59 other ships of various types captured the French commander, General Renato Ferdi, and more than 2,200 Venetians and Frenchmen. There are countless other material cannons. Your Majesty, if the captured ships join the English Navy, the strength of our Navy will more than double out of thin air." Chapter 171. The final arrangements. "Your Majesty, after this battle, the French will no longer summon a fleet to harass us in a short time. The crisis in England has been resolved." With a happy smile on his plump face, Major James bent slightly and explained. "Yes. I think, even if Henry VIII summons ships to deal with us again, he won't have so much money in his pocket." Edward sneered a few times, with a gloating expression on his face. This news is indeed very happy, but the sense of crisis in Edward's heart has not been completely relieved. "You know, the current ruler of Spain is not only the leader of the Habsburg family, the Holy Roman Emperor, who rules Austria and the Lowlands, Belgium, the Netherlands, northern France, but also the leader of Spain and Iberia, the monarch of the Asian peninsula, the whole of Western Europe, basically prostrate at his feet." Although the relationship between England and Spain is not bad at present, this is because the two have the same enemy, France. The annihilation of the French fleet this time will definitely reduce the strength of France, and the Spaniards may have the upper hand again. "Your Excellency, Major, how many intact ships are there in the Navy?" Edward rolled his eyes and asked immediately this. Major James was a little confused. "The capital ship Sovereign of the Sea is intact, and there are about 30 other ships." After Major James finished speaking, he puffed up his chest and was very proud. After all, given the disparity in strength, it is not bad to be able to fight like this. After hearing this, Edward's heart was bleeding, and he resisted the discomfort and said, "You did a good job, Mr. Major. Now, you let the sailors rest for a day. Tomorrow, you take these intact ships and go to the French port of Francisco for a walk, and Calais by the way. I think the garrison may. It's also quite frightening." Edward moved his lips easily, and sat on the chair with a mocking tone. Obviously, he had already thought in his heart that King Henry VIII of France might turn pale with fright at the news. "You have to know that Port Francisco is located at the mouth of the Seine River. If you have the ability, you can take it. If the French army comes to support you later, you will rob the city hall. Recently, I have spent a lot of money." Edward twisted his neck and said to the surprised Major James, "Yes, Your Majesty." Although he couldn't figure out what it meant, James still nodded in agreement. "Your order is the purpose of my actions. Bending 30 degrees, Major James responded respectfully with his right hand touching his chest. Duh. Major James is a man of action, and by the way, he showed it in front of Edward. His moccasin boots thumped on the golden floor. He turned around cleanly, and walked outside. There was a hint of coldness in Edward's eyes. His expression was no longer relaxed, and his small face with some pimples instantly tensed up. Lucy, go and invite your excellency Kyle Lance to come down, and by the way, invite the one from the Dark Blade, the person who has made great achievements in this raid. For a moment, Edward couldn't remember the Dark Blade's subordinate, and a look of embarrassment flashed across his face, and then he calmly gave instructions to Lucy, who was full of work. Lucy agreed in a pretty way, then twisted her buttocks and went out. Edward thought about it for a while, and in a blink of an eye, Lucy walked in with a middle-aged gentleman with crutches, eyes shining, and hair combed shiny, with a hint of joy on his face. Behind the two was a tall young man with thin cheeks and timid eyes. With his head lowered and his waist bent, he walked in slowly. Edward coughed, expressing his understanding of their salute, and then looked back and forth between the faces of the two of them, and then said, I think you all know by now that the French expeditionary fleet has been wiped out. Hearing Edward's words, the faces of the two of them jumped with joy, and when they were about to kiss Edward's ass, they were stopped by him. Okay, don't say good things now. I have a task for you now. As soon as he heard that he was valued by the king and handed over the task, he felt overjoyed, and quickly bent his already slanted waist, almost at 90 degrees. Your Majesty, it is my honor to serve you. Lance, the Minister of the Privy Council, sounded magnetically. Your Majesty, please order. Cooper's somewhat hoarse voice sounded afterward. Mr. Lance, just now I have ordered Major James to prepare to go to the French port tomorrow, and you should prepare now and go together, Your Majesty. This, Lance's rosy face turned pale in an instant. He is a literati. How can he go to war? Go and meet Henry VIII of France and tell him the news of our victory? Of course. By the way, negotiate with him to make up for our losses. The price should be as high as possible. By the way, we will not allow those sailors and boats to be redeemed. Edward saw the look of the Privy Council minister, and immediately understood his thoughts, smiled, and said directly, yes, for the glory of England, I will definitely do my best. When he heard that he was not going to war, Lance patted his chest hastily, and assured with a magnetic voice, then go and get ready. Edward waved his hand and bid farewell to the minister of the Privy Council. He was not worried that this minister would annoy Henry II. After all, he still had a noble status, and Henry II was not that stupid. Okay, it's your turn. Edward had some tapes for a while, and then Lucy reminded in his ear, Mr. Cooper, I remember your contribution clearly. When I return to England, I will reward you for your merit. Hearing the king's promise and the upcoming rewards, Cooper's eyes were suddenly filled with excitement. A few days ago, Earl Wellington cleaned up a few big tigers, but the little mice are quite annoying. The corner of Edward's mouth curled up, and he said in disgust. His face became serious. Now you immediately take someone to clean up Edinburgh for me. These annoying garbage are always wandering around, which makes me upset. Cooper looked at His Majesty the King with a look of disgust in his beady eyes, and knelt down on one knee. Your Majesty, this is the mission I should complete. Please rest assured, I promise to catch those annoying mice. It's just, looking at Cooper who was making a guarantee there, he hesitated in his tone, and after thinking about it, he immediately understood. Don't be afraid. If someone stops you, just tell them, this is my order, if anyone dares to resist. Edward dragged his last word, with a ruthless look on his face, shoot or kill, clear. Chapter 172 Final Arrangements. There was a cold light in Cooper's eyes, and he followed Edward's instructions with a murderous look, and walked out wearing a crimson cloak and a dagger on his waist. Cooper walked quickly on the streets of Edinburgh with a dozen or so murderous members of the Dark Blade. With a stern expression on his face, the roadside peddlers, beggars like mummified corpses, and skinny civilians looked at this group of people and hurriedly gave way to save Cooper and his group from trouble. Boom. Boom. Cooper rolled his eyes, and everyone came to a middle-class house. A strong man walked in front of the gate consciously, knocking hard with his hands, and said, and it doesn't stop, open the door, open the door. The stronger buddy hammered harder and harder, and the entire door panel was almost cracked. Here, you. The servant who hurried to open the door didn't finish his sentence when a man put a sword on his neck. His face turned blue and his body trembled with fright. Where is your master? Cooper walked over, gently removed the dagger around his neck, and asked in the servant's ear. Yes. Looking at Cooper's increasingly cold eyes, the servant weighed himself for a while, and pointed to the ground directly in the cellar under the bedroom. "Remove the bed, and there is a ladder to go down directly." Cooper patted the servant's rough face lightly, and said with a smile, "You're smart, get out." With a big laugh, he led the people behind him, and followed the servant's instructions with ease. "Oh, bad luck." The servant stroked his forehead with his right hand and said with a sigh, "I'd better take some money and run away, and go hide in other places." The servant was heartbroken, and quickly walked to the study room, took away the valuable jewelry and gold, and ran away like a thief. In this way, in less than 3 days before Edward was about to leave, more than 100 people were arrested in Edinburgh, and the number was 452. Most of them were local low-ranking nobles and knights and some rich wealthy businessmen. For these people, Edward was sentenced to death for the crime of attacking the king, and all their property was confiscated. What Edward didn't expect was that the last action before leaving brought him a lot of income. There were 66 manors with an area of more than 1,000 acres, and the valuation was also £260,000. Edward couldn't count the manors with an area of less than 1,000 acres. He sold them directly and got £80,000. As for pastures, there are 3 with more than 10,000 mu, and more than 30 with more than 1,000 mu. However, most of the pastures in Scotland are pastures, so the valuation has reached £100,000. If the cattle and sheep inside are included, it will at least double, coupled with the gold jewelry, as well as gold coins and silver coins. This time, Edward's total income from confiscating his home reached £500,000, which was the income of the royal family for 2 years. The Scottish nobles are really fucking rich. They really are feudal nobles. They have a lot of manor land. Sure enough, ransacking their homes is the best way to get rich. It's a pity that they are all merchants and low-ranking nobles. If they are high-ranking nobles, then they should not make a big fuss. At this time, Edward also began to calculate the property of the Scottish royal family, that is, the property of the Tudor royal family. After all, these can be regarded as the dowry of the little lolly. After Edward arrived in Edinburgh, he immediately asked the Minister of Royal Affairs, Sir John, to come. After all, professional matters should be left to professional people. "Your Majesty, these are the property lists of the Stuart royal family. Take a look." Sir John stroked his 2 mustaches, and cheerfully handed over a ledger made of white paper to Edward's hands, smiling all over his eyes. "Interesting, Your Excellency. Is there need to be so happy?" Edward looked at the thick account book in front of him. His head was full, and then he looked up to see Sir John's smiling eyes, and asked amusedly, "Your Majesty, thanks to your wise command, we have incorporated Scotland into the territory of the Tudor royal family, and the Tudor royal family has truly become rich. You are truly a king blessed by God. You are the birth of an angel, God's representative in the world. Or, your wisdom and greatness, I really admire, can be compared with you. England is at your command. This is really..." Sir John said it smoothly, and flattered his face quickly. Edward, who was thick-skinned, was a little embarrassed. He waved his hands again and again, and stopped him with a smile. "Okay, Mr. Sir, tell me the specific situation." Sir John, who flattered as smoothly as eating and sleeping, could only stop. It seemed that he hadn't said enough, and looked at Edward with eyes like a resentful woman. "Your Majesty, according to my statistics, the Scottish royal family owns 136 manors in the lowlands, of which 53 are over 1,000 mu and 6 are over 10,000 mu. Moreover, there are a total of 163 pastures, 125 with more than 1,000 mu, and 13 with more than 10,000 mu, and the total number of cattle and sheep owned is no less than 1 million. The Scottish royal family also owns 36 castles, 563 mills, 39 merchant ships, countless wastelands, deep forests, mountains, lakes and swamps, totaling no less than tens of millions of acres. Equivalent to the size of a Beijing city. The northern part of Scotland is desert, and there are plenty of it." The more Sir John said, Edward's face became more and more ruddy. "Although it is some real estate, it produces a large amount of money every year. It really deserves to be the Stuart royal family that has ruled Scotland since 1371. It has been 200 years. Sure enough, the accumulation is rich." Seeing His Majesty the King with a flushed face, Sir John continued happily, "There are 563 islands of various colors, 16 French manors, and 165 shops of various colors." "Okay, sir, you just have to tell me how much you can produce in a year." Edward stopped Sir John's endless report and asked, "You if you deduct various administrative expenses, as well as personnel salaries and maintenance expenses, the annual income will be nearly £80,000. Did I hear you right?" "My Mr. Jazz, With so many properties, there is only such a little income. It's not normal. Edward's jaw almost dropped when he heard the words. It sounds like he's so rich, but his income is only a little at the end, so he was happy for nothing, Your Majesty. It is true that so many castle maintenance tasks are not a small sum every year, and the Privy Council, the county governors, thousands of troops and the navy, if you add the various expenditures given to the Highlanders every year, you can the remaining 80,000 British pounds is pretty good. As he spoke, Sir John looked at Edward with an innocent face and explained, I can understand everything else, but why give things to the Highlanders? Is there too much money? Edward asked angrily, Your Majesty, I heard that the Scottish royal family spent money to buy peace and appease the Highlanders. Sir John explained. Chapter 173 Final Arrangements. It seems that the Scottish royal family attaches great importance to our England. Edward said angrily, I would rather spend a lot of money to stabilize the Highlanders than fight with us. Is there such deep hatred? This, Sir John scratched his somewhat sparse head, not knowing how to respond. If he had to say it regardless of reality, it would be bad for his reputation to spread the word. The entanglement between Scotland and England began with William the Conqueror, and it has been going on for hundreds of years. James IV died at the hands of Henry VIII. After Queen Mary's father, James V, was defeated in the battle with the English army, he didn't know whether he was injured or angry. He returned to Edinburgh for a while and died, indirectly in the hands of the English. Sir John was a little speechless, so he stood there dryly, listening to Edward complain. Okay, sir, sell me all those useless castles and small manors and ranches. Edward scolded for a while, feeling that a few words could not make money out of thin air, and it was a waste of saliva. It was not worth it, so he could only order Sir John also, you will be staying in Scotland for a while this time, and I'm afraid there will be a large amount of income waiting for you to collect. Although only a few £100,000 in cash came to Scotland on the whole, it still greatly alleviated the current embarrassment of the royal family and the government. Moreover, there will still be a feast of division waiting for Edward. It's too late to take the knife and fork to the table, Your Majesty. Please tell me that I am fully prepared, even if I stay in Scotland for a year. Sir John's eyes gleamed with gold when he heard the large income, and he nodded and clapped his big hands on his chest. His lips parted slightly. He swallowed a few mouthfuls of saliva, and stared at Edward anxiously. Edward looked at his big shiny face, smiled and said, when I first came here, I negotiated with those nobles and promised to carry out religious reform in Scotland, and to reform the Church of Scotland in my name. And during the reform process I can be divided into 3 layers for the improper religious property. It is indeed a coup to carry out the religious reform in Scotland first of all, in the name of Edward, before the interests of the Scottish Church are divided. The Scottish nobles and commoners temporarily take the same position as Edward. In this way, the situation in Scotland will be much more stable within a few years. Furthermore, church reform has never been smooth sailing. Even when Duke Edward became more radical, there were frequent riots all over England. Although the Scottish nobles are powerful, the loyalty of the Scots to Catholicism is much stronger than that of the English. In the 21st century, although the state religion of Scotland is the Presbyterian Church, there are still nearly 4 layers of people in the country who believe in Catholicism, and with the piss of the nobles, let them lead a religious reform, the resistance of the Catholic Church may become more intense, and the two may lose both sides. In the end, Edward can fish in troubled waters and completely bring Scotland into his own hands, unlike now Seymour, get an empty header. As soon as Edward talked about his coup, he couldn't help but feel complacent, with a happy smile on his face. But in Sir John's view, His Majesty the King laughed a bit lewdly. Bah, is great. Sir John thought silently. Sir, you have to keep your eyes open, don't let those nobles fool you. Edward reminded with his eyes slightly open the accumulation of the Church of Scotland for hundreds of years, even if Scotland is relatively poor, but this is not a small number. Yes, yes, I will definitely keep your property intact for you. Seemingly hearing the implication of Edward's words, Sir John's broad forehead burst into cold sweat, and he hurriedly responded. Edward nodded lightly, expressing his approval. With you here, I feel relieved. Edward couldn't help getting nervous. You didn't come to the Middle Ages, you didn't know the power of the Church, and you didn't know how much money those fat monks had in their pockets. Take England as an example. Before the Reformation, the annual output value of the Church's estates and manors reached £400,000, while the total annual income of the Tudor royal family was only £100,000. Henry VIII lived frugally for decades, and left Henry VIII with a property of £2 million, which is only the total income of the Church for 5 years. This does not include income from tithes, sin rolls, etc. After Henry VIII's religious reform, he earned £400,000 a year from it, which supported Henry VIII's military expeditions to France year after year. Sir John's heart was a little fuzzy, and he retreated slowly, while Edward watched his somewhat plump body gradually leave. His eyes became deeper and deeper. In fact, as the Minister of Royal Affairs, there are countless nobles who speak ill of Edward in his ears every month, and Edward does not believe that he is so clean, and few nobles in the world are clean. After diverting his thoughts for a while, Edward came back to his senses. Sir John is still very useful at present. Brother Edward, are we going back to London? Just when Edward was a little lost, a pleasant voice suddenly rang in his ears. A doubting smile appeared on Edward's face for a moment, and he turned around. A pair of big dark blue eyes fluttering, with a lock of long dark red hair in her mouth, wearing a white dress with pink lace trim. The cute little lolly stared at Edward with wide eyes and looked up. Rubbing his neck, he asked curtly, "Of course. Doesn't Mary want to go back?" Edward stroked little Lolita's fluffy long hair and bent down to ask. "The servants of the castle have been packing up things recently, and little Lolita has already guessed it. I want to go back too. Without me to feed, Lilith's little stomach would be so hungry." Little Lolly seemed to think of the little red horse she raised, with bulging pink cheeks, like two little beos. He said with some annoyance, "If I depended on you to feed it, the little red horse would have starved to death." Edward thought unscrupulously, "But, if I go back to London, what will my mother do? I don't want to leave my mother." Little Lolita was caught in an endless loop for a while. Her eyes were a little red. It seemed that this was a difficult choice for her. Seeing that little Lolita was crying anxiously, Edward quickly explained, "Mary, don't worry, Mom can go back to London together. You can persuade Mom to go to London together. I think Mary is so cute. Mom will definitely accompany Mary to London, and I'm going to persuade my mother to go to London together." Little Lolita showed her face, clenched her fists, and said firmly. Seeing the little lolly running away again, the corners of Edward's mouth curled up slightly. Chapter 174, Festival and London. In fact, as expected by Edward, after little Lolita's hard work, and her reluctance for her daughter, Queen Mary finally went to London, England with little Lolita for Queen Mary. Edward also has considerations. If Queen Mary has been living in Edinburgh, she is like a flag, attracting the attention of the French and the Scottish independence forces. She is in Scotland, and she can be sure that the Scottish independence forces will definitely increase in strength. Therefore, for the safety of Scotland and his own interests, Edward invited this beautiful and mature French lady to London. Moreover, all the nobles in Scotland are disgusted with this French woman who seized power, and wish she would go in this way, with the release of all forces. The Queen Mother finally boarded the carriage to London on June 1, 1549. The whole of Edinburgh was suddenly surrounded by a festive atmosphere. As a shop boy, Elton just woke up and opened the door of the shop, and saw the pedestrians on the road beaming, as if it was a festival, and even the other shop assistants in the shop were also looking happy, which made him puzzled. "Hey, Burr, what's the matter?" Elton asked curiously, holding a big man in the store who had been giggling. "Haven't you heard? The little King of England is leaving and going back to England, so the people of Edinburgh are singing happily," said the silly Big Burr with a smile. "This is indeed a happy thing." Elton was also a little happy. "Elton, please let me know. I'm happy today. All the ready-made clothes in the store will be reduced by 2 levels. Don't forget it," the chubby shopkeeper said to Elton with a smile, and then walked out of the store and walked happily on the street. Walking understood. Elton agreed, and then notified the other guys. As a store clerk, did he know that in the past month, a lot of fabrics had been accumulated in the store, and he just took this opportunity to sell them. So, with the spread of this ready-to-wear shop, almost all the shops in Edinburgh are reducing their prices, and Edinburgh people have also started to sweep the goods, and Edinburgh is lively all day long. Merchants make a lot of profits on this day, and they consciously cut prices to survive at this time of year, and Edinburgh has a festival. So, what Edward didn't expect was that he finally left Edinburgh with a festival that has been passed down for hundreds of years. Edinburgh is built on a hilly area with rugged terrain, undulating hillsides, and a strong city wall. It can be said that Edinburgh is a place that is easy to defend and difficult to attack. Riding on a horse, looking ahead, the lush trees look green on the hills, and beside the winding road, there are a few foraging birds parked from time to time, and the lively cheers of Edinburgh can be heard intermittently. Voice standing straight, with a smile on his face, Edward kept greeting various Scottish nobles under the tall city walls of Edinburgh, and the Scottish nobles were all enthusiastic and moved, as if they were extremely reluctant to leave him. Your Majesty, that is a kind call behind him. Queen Mary was wearing a white tunic dress, holding little Lolita in her arms, and greeted the nobles who came to say goodbye gracefully, and little Lolita also stayed in Queen Mary's arms obediently on the left and right sides of the carriage. Baron Smith, Earl of Wellington, Major Dio who came back from the support, Dark Blade Commander Cooper and others rode on horseback to stand on both sides, and the guards with vigilant faces, plus the surrounding 3,000 guards and 2,000 people. As for Major James, he returned by boat, which was quick and convenient, bringing in the Privy Councillors and Sir John, who were left by Edward to deal with the Scottish Reformation. In addition to the carriages of Edward and the others, there were nearly 100 carriages, large and small, which followed Edward's army back to London. They were all Scottish MPs who went to England to serve Edward, who also left in Edinburgh. 2,000 militia gathered from several counties in the north, handed over to the command of Alexander Knights, and settling in Scotland. Although the Alexander Knight was handsome, he still had military talent, and he followed Henry VIII, and his political ability was not low, his conduct was good, and he was trustworthy. Bidding farewell to the Scottish nobles who came to see him off, Edward rode his horse and galloped to the front of the convoy. He shouted with all his strength, "Let's go!" Immediately, Edward's order was transmitted to the front of the army, and the entire convoy began to move slowly. At this time, a light rain just fell in fickle London, and in an instant, the sun was no longer shy, casting beams of gentle light. After a light rain, the whole of London began to come alive again. Since the Hanseatic merchants were taxed and privileges were abolished, the whole of London began to exude vitality, and the streets and alleys were full of busy figures. People were in a hurry, with serious faces, and the idea that time is money began to take root in the hearts of the people. The slow-moving carriage was carefully driving on the crowded street. Soldiers with physical disabilities, wearing black suits specially designed by Edward for them, with red cloth scarves on their arms, daggers on their waists, with murderous expressions, kept turning their heads on the street. Watch carefully. The sewage on the street slowly slipped into the sewer along the roadside, and the whole street looked much cleaner. He stepped on a small hole full of water in the street, and the splashed sewage directly wet Suwa's sheepskin boots, but he didn't care so much, and directly hired an empty carriage on the street, and sat in it. "Go to the city hall." Sewell gasped and said with a Norwich accent, "Sit still, sir." The groom reminded, and made the horse turn a corner before accelerating. Sitting on the somewhat swaying carriage, Sewell couldn't help but breathe a sigh of relief. Since he was admitted more than a month ago, he and all the admission staff have been trained by the etiquette officer for more than a month, and it didn't stop until yesterday. In a moment of pleasure, he drank a few drinks in the pub with some of his friends from Norwich, but he got up late today. You must know that this is his first day of reporting. The London City Hall moved out from the Palace of Westminster a few days ago and bought a villa in the city centre as the seat of the city government. This is your reward. Seeing the conspicuous building of the city government, Sewell took out 5 pence from his pocket and handed it to the groom. After getting off the carriage, he went straight to the Port and Wharf Management Office. As soon as he arrived at the door, he heard the director sternly say, "His Majesty the King will return from Scotland tomorrow. Please be careful, so as not to make any mistakes." Chapter 175. The Wharf. What? His Majesty the King is coming back? Sewell couldn't help being surprised when he overheard such news. This is a big event. The city hall is a 2-story attic. The lower part is the meeting room and workroom of each hall, and the upper floor is the office of the mayor and the ministers. The halls are not far apart. It can be said that they are only separated by a wall. It's just a wall. Therefore, with Sewell's ears on the wall, he could still hear the roar and reprimand of the Earl of Southampton from the city management hall next door, which further confirmed the correctness of what the director said. For King Edward, Sewell still has a lot of gratitude in his heart, but less fear in his mind. King Edward, like Henry VIII, was a wise king who ruled England, and the development of England would definitely be strong in the future. This is not only because Edward passed the exam to admit officials, but also made it possible for ordinary civilians like him to discuss matters with the nobles, cross classes in one fell swoop, and came to the upper class. Of course, this is the main reason. More importantly, Scotland, which could not be conquered by all the kings of England for hundreds of years, was conquered by Edward at this time, which had to make the people of England have full confidence in him. To be precise, the nobles and local gentlemen. Sewell entered through the back door cautiously, found a seat and sat down at random, but the director, who was spitting all over the front, didn't notice, and still talked with relish. "You must put all your energy into cleaning up all the hooligans and rubbish for me in the next few days." It is said that when His Majesty comes back this time, he may review the achievements of the city government since its establishment. You must not give me disgraceful. Looking at the chattering figure in front of him, Seymour could only prick up his ears, with a serious expression on his face. Not only him, more than 30 people around him also listened to this nonsense speech. There was no trace of impatience on their faces. Instead, they straightened their backs one by one, and some even showed expressions of enjoyment. Most of the dozens of people are employees of the original municipal government. Due to the small number of people, they can only be reappointed to contribute to the London municipal government, and there are only 10 people who passed the exam and entered like Seymour. However, those old employees knew that they were all valued by His Majesty the King, and their future prospects were limitless, so they all cast friendly glances at him, and Seymour responded modestly one by one. 10 minutes later, the strong and gentle-looking director finally finished his instruction before disbanding and let them start to act. To be honest, the Port and Wharf Management Office of the municipal government is actually only playing a supervisory role. And there are not many things to pass on the orders of the municipal government. The managers who actually do things are still the same, but the managers with more outstanding abilities are included in the municipal government. In fact, the situation remains the same. The purpose of the establishment of the Port and Dock Office is nothing more than to clarify the division of responsibilities, manage and appoint and dismiss the tax officials and small officials of those ports. Therefore, Seymour followed an old man who walked out of the port and went to inspect it. Together as the port with the largest throughput in England, the Port of London has a particularly large area, so more than 30 people can only be divided into two groups and patrol separately. Broadly speaking, the scope of the Port of London includes from the north and south banks of the lower reaches of the Thames River, to the mouth of the river, extending upstream through the Tilbury Port area, crossing the London Bridge, and until Teddington Pier. A distance of up to 80 kilometers belongs to Port of London. To put it bluntly, the distance from the estuary of the Thames to London is within the management range of the Port of London. These include many docks for loading and unloading goods along the river, riverside wharfs and docks for repairing ships. Of course, the current key prosperous areas of the Port of London are still at the Estuary Wharf and the last Teddington Wharf, one head and one tail, and Sewell was lucky to be assigned to inspect the nearest Teddington Wharf, without having to go dozens of kilometers away by boat. Although the distance is short, Teddington Pier is no longer in the City of London. It is in the Tilbury Port area in the east of London, about 5 or 6 miles, 8-9 kilometers, away from the current City of London. Two people can only rent one carriage. Sitting in the carriage, due to the overhaul of the road by the London city government a while ago, the road was much smoother, and soon, the two arrived at Stington Pier. The middle-aged man in his 30s who was with Seymour was promoted from the port tax officer. He knew a lot about the port terminal, but he was just like ordinary officials, stingy, greedy, and cunning. Mr. Bruce, we're here. The carriage stopped slowly, and after Sewell consciously paid the fare, he gently reminded Bruce to close his eyes and rest. Oh, really? It's here so soon? Come on, Sewell, I brought you a glimpse of Teddington Pier. Bruce sighed as if he had just discovered it. Seymour on the side could only curse silently in his heart, with a calm face. With that said, the two got out of the carriage, and as they walked, Bruce introduced the various rules of the pier. Seymour also listened with great interest, watching the shiploads of goods being unloaded by the dock workers with a disheveled face, and then the impatient cargo ship hurriedly docked. The cargo on the ship can only be unloaded after the tax is collected on board the ship, and the dock workers on the side also consciously waited for the tax collector to collect the tax, and then slowly boarded the ship to unload the goods under the assignment of a few strong men with ruthless faces. All kinds of cargo ships were parked at the pier, and the sweaty dock workers walked slowly with heavy cargo on their backs, so that the pier was full of unpleasant sweat smell. There are also various merchants with horse-drawn carts, donkey carts, and buggies, negotiating with the merchants on board. However, Seymour noticed that the feces of various livestock, sewage, and garbage thrown by merchants on the pier were not uncommon. And there were mosquitoes crawling from time to time, and the floor tiles of the entire pier were already stained and black. But the wharf workers and tax officials turned a blind eye and didn't care at all. In other words, they were used to it. Seymour frowned, looking at the dirty environment, feeling a little difficult. When he was about to worry, Bruce suddenly brought two people over, a man with a strong build and a tough face, and a man with a big belly in a tax official's clothes, with a kind expression on his face. Sewell, this is Mr. Amos, the tax officer at the dock, and this is the leader of the dock workers, Gary. Bruce introduced Sewell with a smile on his face. Nice to meet you, Your Excellency. Sewell. The chubby tax official squinted his eyes and greeted, "Dear Mr. Sewire, it's God's arrangement to meet you today." Gary, who looked tough, suddenly looked like a cautious farmer, flattering his humble ass. Sewire didn't know why Bruce introduced himself to these two people, but years of reading had given him a good sense of self-cultivation, and he still greeted them kindly and friendly. All of a sudden, the three of them seemed to be friends who had known each other for many years, and the atmosphere became heated and Bruce stood aside, smiling and watching. Without saying a word immediately, Sowell brought up the arrangement of the city government, and Gary and Tax Officer Amos patted their chests repeatedly, promising to complete the tasks of the city government, and they agreed very happily. Finally, at the suggestion of the Tax Officer Amos, the four of them went to his house to have dinner together. Seeing that the matter was handled happily, Sewire also nodded and agreed. End of this chapter. Thank you very much for reaching the end. Don't forget to like. Looking for more exclusive content and immediate access? Subscribe to our Patreon. Remember, every like, subscription, or donation encourages us to continue. Thanks to everyone. See you in the next video.